Good morning. A lot of good conversations going on right now, but I hate to interrupt. If you could take your seats, really appreciate that. We're going to get started. I'm 2 minutes late. I don't like to be late. But first, I want to call up one of our sponsors for today for our breakfast. And I want to bring up Mark Sampson from SailPoint to give us a little intro to him and his organization. So thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Matt. Honored to be here today and honored to sponsor the breakfast this morning. As Matt said, my name is Mark Sampson. I'm with SailPoint. For those who don't know who SailPoint is, we are a leader in the identity governance space. In fact, Gartner has named us one of their leading vendors in their Magic Quadrant for 5 years in a row. We develop identity solutions through the lens of governance and compliance. And we put the identity at the center of IT and security, and we take a governance-based approach to managing the data identity across all your systems and applications. And we do this whether the applications or systems are on-prem or in the cloud. And we also can manage the data whether it's structured or unstructured. Our product suite is a unified solution that includes lifecycle management, compliance management, password management, and we also have functionality that allows you to do access reviews, access requests, and certification through the process. Some of our customers here in New England include Stewart Healthcare System, Yale New Haven Hospital, and Dartmouth Hitchcock. I'll be here all day today at one of the booths on the left side of me, so please feel free to stop by and we can talk about your identity governance strategy and learn a little bit more about SailPoint. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for sponsoring the event today. Well, this is a big crowd, so I want to thank you all for coming this morning. When I saw the weather report a few days ago, it was supposed to be real sunny, but you know New England. It rained a little bit, but I think it's still going to be a nice day. So thank you all for being here. I want to start out with the presentation today. I have about 15 minutes, or maybe a little bit less, which is a bit much for me. Usually it's a few-minute intro, but I'm glad to be here and be able to provide that introduction to this event. So again, welcome for being here. Up on the screen is a couple of group photos that we've taken at a few of our events over the last year or so. And I just want to take a moment to thank these great volunteers for helping put together an event such as this. If I can get a round of applause for those volunteers. Everyone that's at the registration desk, sponsorships, our speaker committee, it really does take we say a village, but it's a small town actually for this region. We are one of the only chapters, if not the only, that has 6 states that cover the entire chapter. Most chapters are individual states or part of a state. So we have a lot of ground to cover. And we do that well, I think. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. I wanted to give you a little bit of background into the chapter, some data. I'm a data guy. I love data. So I wanted to show you a little bit of statistics for New England, for the New England chapter. As of May 1st, we have almost 3,300 members. Now, I don't know if that's the largest chapter, but thank you, everyone, for being here. Most of which, as you can see, are in Massachusetts. But we do stretch down to Connecticut as well and throughout the rest of New England. But we are very Massachusetts-centric. And as that little heat map, our membership committee puts together this slide on the left-hand side, is you can see it's very Boston-centric. But we do, and as you look to the right, the right picture, we do try to spread around these events throughout the region. We had our Northern Maine event in Bangor, Maine. Some of you may have been there. Most of you weren't. But we had most recently our event in the Fireside Inn in Lebanon, New Hampshire, and then our two events that are coming up today, indicated by number 10, is today's event. Number 9 is our future event, which I'll talk to you about in a moment. But as you can see, our heat map, we have most of our events in the greater Boston area. A couple of things. We had a membership survey go out to all of you. Unfortunately, not all of you filled it out, but I'm going to say that we did get some feedback, and I wanted to point out a couple of things. How long have you been a chapter member? A lot of you 5 years or less, which is good. So we're growing. We continue to add new members over time. What should the chapter focus on next year? Well, webinars is an area that we need to advance. We need to provide more of that because we're so geographically dispersed throughout New England. I think webinars is another way that we can bring our membership together to provide educational opportunities to you and to the far corners of Maine to all the way down to Connecticut. So I think that's a goal for us for next year. How many events do you try to attend each year? 2 or more. It's the large majority of you try to attend a couple of events. I know it's hard sometimes to take an entire day off from work to be here, but we do appreciate you coming to those events. And we want to provide those educational and networking and socializing opportunities to you. So the more you come to our events, the more we'll be able to have. Top 3 reasons for attending our chapter events. Educational and professional are number 1, followed closely by networking, and then the speakers. So we do try to attract some higher profile speakers from within the region and from outside the region. And we'll talk a little bit about that, how we did that for today. Last slide on membership survey results, and I felt it was very important to share this with you all, as many of you did fill this out, and many of you do ask us about what makes up your chapter, what makes up your membership. 50%, as we expect, are provider organizations, hospital medical centers. And a large portion of that are the vendor IT professionals and sales business development. And that's the way things have been going for the organization. We've been attracting more of the consultants and the vendor space. We have a smaller sliver of students. We're trying to improve on that. One of our student representatives on the board who couldn't be here today, she's really been helpful in communicating with our students throughout the region, in the schools, and trying to bring them to our events. And we have a few students here today, and we thank them for coming. All right, so today's event, a couple of things, more data. The number of members, the percent of membership is about 45% of our attendees today. Non-members about another 28%. So all of you non-members, we have a membership table over in the corner. This is my pitch to you. They're waving over there in the corner, so please stop by. We would love to have you talk to them, and they can give you some information about becoming a member and all the great benefits about being a member. First-time attendees, we have a question on our registration page. If you are a first-time attendee, 38% of you are first-time attendees, which is pretty good, although I'd love to see you at more. Love to see you at more events. Of those 38%, about 11% are members. So there are some members out there that are making the extra special trip to come down for our annual event here at Gillette Stadium. It's always a popular event, but we'd love to see you at more. And should you have reasons why you might not be at those other events, we'd love to hear from you too. Reach out to me, reach out to our membership committee. We'd love to speak to you. Some demographics around the work state. Many of you work in one state but might live in another, so this is based on your working state. 80% in Massachusetts, followed by New Hampshire and Connecticut, another 3%, but over 10% from outside the region. Okay, so I thought that was interesting to share with you. But we have plenty of people coming in from outside the region because they hear about us and they want to be here to meet all of you. So where are our speakers coming from? So as I said, one of the initiatives that we tried to do for this event is to try to bring speakers in from outside the region. We have 4 of our presenters today that are from the New England area. Then we have a number of others from around the country. So we're excited to have them all here today, and I just wanted to share this with you, and we're excited to bring them to this venue. today's event. A couple of housekeeping items. I have to do it. Please put your phones on silent. Okay. That would be very helpful. Restrooms, if you haven't already found it, it's in the back of the room on this first level. We couldn't have an event such as grand as this, and with as many of you here, without our sponsors. So please visit the sponsor tables around the room, as well as up on the balcony. We have a few of our Innovator Spotlight organizations, which I'll mention to you in a moment here. It's kind of a different dynamic about how we're going to do our event today. We're excited to have them as well. So please visit those tables. As you received when you came in, we have a bingo card. Get those signed, and we have some prizes to give away to you at the end of the event. So as I mentioned, our Innovator Spotlight organizations are up on the balcony. Please visit them as well. They have some demonstrations as well. All the presentations, we will be sending them around at the end of the event, likely a couple of days later. So we will get those to you. Also, weather depending and field depending, last year we had this event at the Putney Club. Many of you may have been there. And we were able to have field visits. So it's always nice to take a look at the Patriot Stadium and get down to the field, take some photos. So we're going to let you know around lunchtime if we're going to be able to do that. And if, for those of you that were here last year, if you remember the large columns that were in the middle of the room, well, we kind of did away with it here. I think this venue, this space really opens up nice. Everyone can see everything. The sponsors are right with us. And it's a much better feeling. So I hope you enjoy this space better. And don't forget, at the end of the event, we are going to send out a survey. We do want to hear from you. What did we do right? Specifically, what did we do wrong? And then any other suggestions that we can do for you would be very helpful to us in putting on some great sessions for you. Many of you have seen the program, obviously. We did a wonderful job. This takes a lot of work to put together. On that program does have our Wi-Fi information. If you didn't already see it, here it is in lights. So please sign on to our Wi-Fi if you need a connection. One thing that we didn't do right was we omitted a couple of our sponsors, and I have to say I'm sorry. I want to thank Trinisys for their generous support and for the event photography. We have a photographer that's running around taking photos of you, so I just wanted to mention that, as well as Infor for the generous support of the videography. We do have a video camera up at the top of the balcony. We are going to record this, and we're going to make it available to you so that you can see it again. And thank you. One other thing, we have our upcoming event, the final event. We're collaborating with the Connecticut Partners for Health for an event on June 7th. It's an all-day event at the Hartford, Connecticut Convention Center in Hartford. New England HIMSS members will receive a 20% discount. So if you are a member, we would love to have you join. There's more information on our website. A couple of the agenda topics this year will be social determinants of health, health IT, healthcare reform, and health equity. So we'd love to see you there. That will be our final New England HIMSS associated event of the year. And our next year will start as of July 1, so more information will come about that. And that's what I have. So I want to thank you all for coming, and we're going to call up our first speaker right now. And I have the distinct honor of introducing our keynote speaker of the morning, Hal Wolf. Hal is our president and CEO of the of the HIMSS organization, the national organization of 70,000 members globally. With nearly 35 years of experience, Hal is respected internationally as a healthcare and informatics executive with areas of expertise in mobile health, product development, integrated care models, marketing distribution, IT, innovative implementation, which is today's theme. He has helped healthcare systems and providers across the world with end-to-end operations, commissioning data, and architectural design. Before joining HIMSS, Hal served as the Chartis Group as a director, practice leader of information and digital health strategy. Mr. Wolf also served as the senior vice president and chief operating officer of Kaiser Permanente's Permanente Foundation, and as vice president of e-business, CIO for corporate systems and wholesale divisions of Quest Communications US West. Previous endeavors include working internationally in the deployment of interactive television services in operations, content, and business development. senior business management positions with Time Warner, MTV Networks, and senior advisor to McKinsey & Company and ADVI Inc., LLC. Mr. Wolf is former vice president of HIMSS, former vice chair, of HIMSS Enterprise Board, a board member of the International Care Delivery Alliance, and of the Certification Commission for Healthcare Information Technology. He's a visiting professor for Maersk McKinney Møller Institute at the University of South Denmark, the Center for Innovative Medical Technology at the Odense, sorry if I said that wrong, University Hospital in Denmark, and Windsor University Odette School of Business in Canada. He gets around, he travels. He also served as board advisor for the Patient at Home European Union initiative that develops new products for home care while supporting the end-to-end acute care continuum. So please welcome me in joining Hal Wolf to the stage. Thank you.
In the on position? How about that? All right. Well, after that lengthy introduction, we're out of time, so thank you so much for being here. Let me put this elsewhere so I don't trip over it for the rest of the talk. Thank you for having me. I do want to do a special call out to Wolf & Company over here. No relation, but they have a great name, so we're going to go with that, right? There you go. Thank you. Thank you for being here, and first of all, more so even, thank you for inviting me. I've been traveling a bit, as you heard a few minutes ago. In fact, I came in late last night, or late afternoon maybe, from London. And so I made it, I grabbed some food, went to my room, worked on the presentation for a while. Finally got to bed about 10 o'clock. So I'm glad this is a morning talk, because in the afternoon, this may not go so well. I've had a wonderful time over the last 8 months having a chance to lead HIMSS, of which you all are a significant part. And this is an amazing chapter event, and I think it's fantastic that so many non-members are here, and I completely agree. We hope that you'll consider becoming a member of HIMSS from a global standpoint. We're going to talk about a couple of things. So first, I want to give an update about HIMSS itself, and we're going to talk about where we are and where we're going, and give a sense of the organization, because it really has become quite a global entity. Just last couple days, working with the NHS, thinking about how are we going to handle the transformation of data, what are going to be the efforts necessary in the NHS to bring, for the CIOs, transformation in digital health, tying into the Digital Health Academy. These are the kind of questions that HIMSS gets all the time. And how do we bring our expertise to bear, not only on the technical side, but on the policy side and on the implementation side? And this is just a normal day in our lives, literally on a global basis. It's everything you do in your local markets every single day and in your systems. So this past year, for those of you who may not have had a chance to tap into it at the global conference this year, and that was an important name change for us there, but the mission statement within HIMSS has changed because it's about the transformation of health through information and technology. That was the biggest change this year. Internally, we call it the power of A&D. And before, it was the transformation of health through IT. So why the split? Well, from the board of directors standpoint, from our point of view on the ground, information technology is the foundational piece. It is the technology side of who we are and what we do. That's never going to change. But we have globally been making huge investments in IT. And we are now beginning to take the information, the data, if you would, and transform it and bring it forward. So we're going to be talking about that as well. But the underlying components of what we are looking at is the use of information and how to improve health through the use of that information. Now, HIMSS has had a very long and prestigious history, and I actually met one of the founding members from back in 1961. There are actually a couple of them that are still around, and they are very engaged and still working. He was a student at Georgia Tech when his professor pulled the society together. And it's grown consistently through the years, And we added HealthBox this year. We added Health 2.0 this past year. So we've been expanding in the innovation and in the investment space. But our influence on a global basis really begins here. It is fundamentally an expression, if you would, of our membership base helping us think through our positioning on government policy. The week before last, I was actually in Washington, D.C., talking with Don Rucker at ONC, working at the CTO's office, talking to Ways and Means Committee. We're influencing the way Washington is thinking. Senator Bennett, I just got a note last night from the state of Colorado, who I haven't had a chance to meet, but I had a chance to work with their staff because I actually live in Denver. They actually committed to joining in the telehealth change in the fight of opioids to allow the use of telemedicine in the treatment of opioid cases, especially, getting it out of just the rural area, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But our influence in Washington is profound. How do we build that idea? Well, we have committees and policy committees that are made up of members. We have a format in which we go through and we draw in people's point of view, and then we put that against what we believe are the long-term needs to be able to take information and move it forward in order to transform. And that sometimes gets into reimbursement policies, it gets into detailed policies in Washington. We're doing the same thing in the UK, we're doing the same thing in the EU, we're doing the same thing in Singapore and Australia, where we have consistent conversations about the policies necessary to enable the use of health. And these models that we work with, which you are also familiar with, like NREM, that is a global standard. That is an amazing global standard. It would actually, I'm sure it would surprise you, right? Does anyone know the second largest country of level 6 and 7 hospitals after the United States? Turkey. Turkey, followed by China. Now, why? Well, it's a great question. I mean, I was literally in Ankara. You're catching up on my miles. I was literally in Ankara 4 weeks ago, meeting with the Minister of Health in Turkey. 4 years ago, the Turkish government made the decision not to follow JCI as their global benchmark standard because there were components in the JCI that they felt did not match up well with the way their hospitals ran. So they wanted to have a benchmark of advancement, and they took JCI basically, they have a Turkish equivalent of it. It's extraordinarily close. We'll let the JCI people work on the lawsuit. But when you go back and look, they used MRAM as their target for the advancements of their hospitals. And they came back to us with that model and said, this has been working. They're up at level 6s. They have a number of 7s. I mean, they have hospitals that the government owns and they also partner in. They're the second largest in the world. And now they want to go Eurasian. So they don't want to just be delivering care within the boundaries of Turkey. They have 1 billion people that live within a 1-hour flight. And so they want to be the destination, right, of medical tourism for those 1 billion people. Well, to do that, guess what you need? An HIE platform. You need to be able to share the data. It has to be able to go out to the hospitals that they are going to be coming from. They have to be able to share with their primary care doctors, starting to sound familiar of what so many of you work on every single day. And so they said, you know what? We need a new relationship. We've been thinking about this from a Turkey point of view. We want to redo the contract. We have a year left on it. Let's do another 5-year agreement. HIMSS, come help and support us to think through what that digital strategy looks like, how we can go ahead and drive NRAM out in the Kakistans of the world and around us, et cetera. Even the components of Russia that get to fly in, how do we do that? So the reach and what you're a part of is literally this global exercise, because we're fundamentally all trying to do the same thing, which is to improve care. And then we have the content that so many of you participate in, the white papers, the research. We bring in other institutions. And so all of this comes together, and we have these multiple lines of services that you're aware of. HIMSS Media, The international components, and we'll look at a map in just a second. Analytics group that takes the information that comes from MRAM and then turns it around and makes data available to the providers, and just the providers, but then also to the market suppliers, and be able to predict where next upgrades are going to be coming from and where there are opportunities for growth within their particular markets. Health 2.0, which does an astounding job of investments and bringing in startups and matching them with the investor community in a series of bake-offs and presentation. And we added HealthBox this year, which has a small C consulting layer behind it, as well as managing investment groupings at the provider level. So providers, many of them have large buckets of money where they're trying to figure out, where am I going to invest in the future of care? Where do I invest in startups? And HealthBox actually helps manage that for people. And of course, PCH Alliance, Personalized Health, which, by the way, you're going to see a tag at the end of it, because they actually have something coming up in October in Boston, and we hope many of you will take advantage of the discounts and obtain. So this membership that you're a part of has all of these things that come together. And yeah, our standards of interoperability, how we're working on that. There's a call coming up with HL7 Fire this week. We're working to get involved in the Argonaut project, which is open APIs. I'm starting now to get into my place that's near and dear to my heart, which is back-end data environments. And from an architecture standpoint, how do we open this up so that applications can grab a hold of the data they need to create the information they need and to be able to bring it forward and improve health? That's what your membership helps drive. That's what we're tapping into. And in the end, it's about the innovation. So if you're not a HIMSS member, this is your call to action, because it's a pretty cool place to be. Our government relations team, I want to call out one more time. We have an incredibly trusted voice in Washington. We operate in a realm of neutrality and nonpartisanship that is called upon over and over again. We will get calls from senators' office, committees' offices, talking about a particular bill, and there is, by the way, nonpartisanship that takes place in Washington. People do come together, and they often use us, HIMSS, as a galvanizing force to be able to put things forward. They harness and tap in to all of the efforts that we do. The maturity models, when we talked about, I didn't want to walk away without talking about our outpatient, as far as NRAM is concerned. That's growing. The CCM, which is the continuity of care maturity model, we are very close to that being adopted by one of the largest healthcare systems in the world, somewhere in an island off the coast of Europe. I'm not going to say. You can guess. But what we're looking at is these models becoming standards. And the one we're thinking about right now, and I'd love for you all to noodle on it, because you may want to come back and join a committee gets formed. But how do we take the components that we already have, and what pieces of it need to come together to truly create an integrated system? Continuous care is an important layer, but there are pieces of MRAM that are a part of it. There's pieces of the analytics that are a part of it. So these are the models that come behind us. The consulting services that we talked about earlier around analytics and HealthBox, and I didn't want to leave out media, because large organizations come to our media group all the time. How do we reach constituencies globally, and how do we pull them together? How do we create our image, and how do we bring our messages forward in a series of events, right? Of course, there's the global conference, but there's literally about 100 events that take place every year under the HIMSS name, including this one. So how do we make sure that the information is available, that people can tap into it? And this is where the chapters are so critically important in bringing those messages forward. So as a global entity, this is our footprint. It's the United States, of course, our foundation. We've added Canada into North America, moving it from the international group. Yeah, that's right. We had Canada not in North America, and apparently they are, the Canadians. Who knew, right? So we made that change this year. We're also taking South America. We have an event this coming week in Brazil, and we're going to be bringing the North America and South America into one group called the Americas. Because otherwise, we're going to be taking care of South America from London, and it just honestly doesn't make much sense. We're doing more and more in South America. We have a publication down there in this market. They're growing, they're thinking about it. I personally worked in Mexico over the last couple years, helping what is the equivalent of the Social Security system to think about their data backends and where they needed to go. Asia Pacific has been growing like crazy in Australia. Europe doing very well, and of course we have a very large presence in the Middle East. So these are the areas that got added over time, and just giving you that history because you get a sense of where the organization has been and where it's going. And we just recently, again, added even more media in 2013, where instead of just pockets of media, we put it all under the HIMSS media umbrella. And now we're bringing all the consulting pieces to bear as well. I mention this because international was sort of sitting on its own. One of the strategic changes we made in the last 8 months is to really centralize a number of these services and take all of the great capabilities and content we're producing here in the States and bring it out on a global basis. Because the differences between these areas is not that significant. And the results continue to grow. We added almost 5,000 people this year. In terms of our membership, we're over 73,000 in classic HIMSS, and most of that growth has been coming a little bit in the United States. International is growing. You'll see 22,000 members of Health 2.0. That's an additional group not included in the HIMSS number. And we have our relationships with our corporate partners. It is fundamentally a really big organization on a global basis. And I had one question asked me the other day by someone. They said, "So is your job full-time?" And I went, "Yeah, mostly." And then someone asked, "Where do I live?" And I answered, United Airlines, which is true. And so finally, we're just looking for total engagement. We want to think through that effort in healthcare, transforming it through information and technology, and we want to influence from every possible capability we can. From media, from membership, from ideas, from policy, from innovation, from investments, from consulting. All of these are the tools we have in our tool belt as a nonprofit to help move the needles. In a couple of weeks, I'll be in Estonia at the WHO meeting on the European region. The European region is 53 countries, and we are bringing HIMSS, and I've been a member in this group now for a couple years. We're bringing our innovation platforms and our frameworks to share with and be a part of the European theater. 40 ministers of health or vice ministers of health out of the 53 countries will be there, and we've been planning on it. Why do we do this? Because that's our mission. That's your mission, and we're here to help it and support it. So let's talk about why we're doing this. Let's talk about why we go through, and I'm going to watch my watch every once in a while because I don't want to go too long. But if I do it just right, there won't be any time for questions, and that's really important. The healthcare systems around the globe, we are all fundamentally facing the exact same problems. We have a very fast-growing population. I love to call it the silver tsunami, and it's coming on us really fast. And we'll look in more detail about it in just a second. But that silver tsunami, which is made up of the baby boomers, as they retire, are changing the economics of healthcare in the industrial world rapidly. We are looking at them living longer. And because we are going to live longer, and I am in this bucket, we're going to wind up with chronic diseases. And that is a burden group that you know chews up 80% of the resources inside healthcare systems. All facts and figures followed by ish, okay? Geographic displacement. When we talk about telehealth, the reason we're tapping into the opioid piece is that Congress thinks that we need geographic displacement only because of rural settings. It's not. We have geographic displacement right in the middle of our urban centers. Geographic displacement in rural and the outstretch is absolutely true, but far too many urban centers in the United States and globally lack the access to care. Funding systems are just as chaotic externally as they are in the states. It's really difficult. You don't know if the money's coming from the state level, the federal level. How are you going to handle reimbursement policies? We're actually a little more cohesive. In other countries, you have a whole bunch of municipalities that are tied in, et cetera. And we have a lack of actionable information that we're getting better at, but folks, we have one other thing that's going on that is really, really scary. And that is a highly educated and informed consumer who has completely different expectations of how their care is supposed to be delivered. On a per capita basis, and the numbers have not moved that much, it's about $450 more in the United States if you look at 2016. We were just looking at the new data yesterday, and we'll be updating these soon. But the average cost in the world on a per capita basis is running at about $4,300 to $4,400 per person. And you can see the United States behind Switzerland and Norway, but actually Sweden just topped us, so we're in 4th place, right? Darn it, we used to be number 1. But the per capita spend in healthcare is immense. And when you look at its percentage of what is covered by an individual country, what you see is that the world average is at about 82% of a nation's healthcare is covered by the government itself. The US is at about 48%. And it's going to climb to roughly 52, 53% as we absorb the silver tsunami, assuming no change in policy. Now, let's get a handle on that for a second, because right now the GDP in the United States consumes 18.5% of our gross national product. To put that in proportion, we spend in the US roughly 50% of every dollar spent globally in defense. So the total defense budget of the entire planet, the United States spends 48 to 49%, right? Literally half the budget on the global planet in defense. And that consumes 8.3% of our GDP. So we are spending more than twice what we spend on defense in the United States for healthcare alone versus our defense budget. It is a massive amount. We spend more than any other country, and our results could get better. And the economics of healthcare are dimensionally changing because of this. These are the 60-year-olds that are coming. And we are not alone in this silver tsunami. You can see it swinging up. And if you want to see some good news out of this chart, look at Africa, that was very flat for many years because of the AIDS epidemic, which literally wiped out a big portion of a growing generation, and they're now getting their foothold back. But here's what happens with that silver tsunami. People are coming, and they're coming really fast. And if you do the math, and we're going to show you some of it, we simply do not have, any more than any other country, fundamentally other than Norway, and we can talk about them explicitly, the resources to have enough beds, and no one has enough resources to have enough doctors or nurses to cover what is needed if we stay in our current paradigm. So these increases in demand, it is literally 3 times services consumption just using the age of 60 versus non-60 for an individual. This is not assuming everyone has, high levels of 4 or more chronic diseases. If you are 60 and above, on average, you're going to consume 3 times the resources. So you're starting to get the silver tsunami effect. And right now, there are globally 23 skilled healthcare professionals per 1,000 people. These are the industrial nations, per 10,000 individuals. That's our average. So when you do the math, by 2035, and we already have a gap, we would need to move from our current level of 7.2 million to 12.9 million healthcare workers in our current delivery paradigm. It is not going to happen. We do not have enough doctors, we do not have enough nurses, we do not have enough clinicians. If you're in healthcare, and we all are, we're in a very good business, but we've got a big shortage coming. So this is the economics that we're looking at. And we are consuming more specialization as we go through more complex care treatment. As we move from traditional primary care all the way up into integrated delivery systems, it starts to take a more coordinated effort and larger teams, the use of data, the use of information. It is team-based care. It is more specialization. It produces better outcomes and it lowers costs. But as we move to that space that needs these extenders, we've got to have the people to do it. Or we've got to figure out better ways to deliver care. So it's back to where we've always been. The assemblage of the parts has to be greater than the individual pieces themselves because we have to get the right care to the right patient at the right time in the most appropriate setting. This has been our motto in the healthcare industry for years, but it's going to fall on the back of digital health capabilities to get there. And here comes the financial rub just to add it in a little bit. Because the silver tsunami is hitting retirement, there are less citizens behind them to generate the GDP to pay for the services. So you heard Denmark mentioned in my introduction. So I'm a visiting professor at Southern Denmark University in the Center for Medical Innovation and Technology. Denmark is a classic example. We are not that different. Currently today, there are 3.2 taxpayers per dependent of the health services in the country. By 2030, it will flip to 2.3 citizens per dependent in the healthcare system. People who are no longer working, but are now in the system or too young to work. So the burden on the economics that sit on top of the individuals who are still standing there, even if GDP doesn't move, is going to go up. So if you think we have a financial challenge in healthcare today, wait 5 years, because it is really going to get even harder. The costs are going to be going up. It's going to consume, as I mentioned, another 3 to 4, 5% of our GDP, depending upon we handle it, and we are not alone. This is happening on a global basis. So it's going to come down to risk. It will come down to spreading the risk on an economic basis. And does that wind up at the national level, the regional level, at the city level? Is it going to fall on the facility? Is it going to fall on the provider? Value-based care. That's all about the transference of risk while also trying to maintain or improve both quality and access. This is the economic game we're in. And what we do as an organization, and by that I mean all of us inclusively, is either going to help make or break both governments and the institutions we work for. Those are the challenges that are on top of you. Okay, so that's the economic challenge. And we're going to take a patient point of view. Now, if you've ever heard me speak before, you've probably seen this picture. If you haven't, I'm going to tell you it's my favorite, so I use it all the time. This is my son, Adam, when he was 7 years old. And this is the moment that he met our dog, Bandit. Bandit left us last year at the age of 15. Adam's closing in on 24 this July. But this is literally the moment they met. I was just lucky enough to snap the picture when it happened in the backyard, and they sort of fell in love, right? And it's absolutely one of my favorite pictures in the whole world, and 50% of you will leave here and not remember anything about anything I said other than this picture, and that's okay, right? Because I've had people come up to me in many different places, and they go, oh, I really loved your talk. Oh, what was great about it? I love that picture of the dog with the kid. Here's the question that comes out of this picture. Which of these two patients had a registry at the time it was taken? Bandit. Their doctor. Exactly. I usually have to give a clue, right? Like their doctor sent him a note telling him it was time for their heartworm medicine. And that wasn't my son. He didn't have heartworms. But our vet did a much better job on the registry basis. And I fear they're still doing a better job than in way too many of our systems of staying on top of the immunization, sending the postcards, calling the house, making sure that Bandit came in for their shot. Why is that happening? We're living in a world right now where the medical model is working and racing to catch up to some level of personalization. If you're already working on just population health, you're probably behind the curve already. Population health is sort of a mass marketing tool. It takes a single national standard by definition, and you put a single piece of information against it, relatively binary, to say whether you're on target or you're not. It's okay, but it doesn't take into account subsegmentation of condition. It doesn't take into account often integrated medical models. If someone's sitting there and they're in a situation where they have multiple chronic diseases, or they're sitting in a comorbidity situation, how does that impact those national standards for population health? This is about us getting to a level of personalized health. And in the space of where people want to actually be taken care of. And we're racing towards this while we're adding in genomic insight at the same time, which is gaining more and more speed and more impact on healthcare, all about personalized care. And the problem is back to this educated, armed with technology individual we call the consumer. Because what they're doing is they're coming in and they're layering in the health model on top of it. And that health model is their model. They're not waiting for us, right? They're using their apps. They're pulling down bad information. Who's the #1 doctor in the world? Dr. Google, right? Dr. Google. And they are tearing through it. And our challenge is how do we take this data and this information that's pouring through them while they're personalizing their care and pull this together? Because if we don't figure out how to take outside-in information and make it available and blend it with our own, they're going to shoot right past us. And the funny thing is they're giving us the equipment in which to do it. Now, if you fly, we all do, and you go back 10 years, we had a screen hanging from the ceiling of the airplane to watch a show, right? Then they started putting video monitors on the seats in front of us where we could control some channels. And now, do any of the new airplanes even have those on them? No. They have a data stream. And who brings your own equipment? We all do. We all do. Bring your own equipment. And they're doing it already in healthcare. We have to take advantage of that. And so these opportunities for us to innovate are absolutely going to be based upon us figuring out how to take this connectivity and build it around a 24/7 access to care. And we don't have to do it all ourselves, but we do have to take advantage and blend it in. So it takes us to that wonderful phrase of digital health, and I always use this definition, which is Humpty Dumpty, right? And it is, when I use a word, it means just what I choose it to mean, nothing more and nothing less. And I put everything in the digital health space: telehealth, telemedicine, virtual care, med devices, anything that touches the healthcare system, this is where we go with it. Because all of this stuff, and this is my favorite chart in the entire world, absolute favorite chart. I used to build my entire budget around this chart. This is about data. Now let me explain this chart, and I want to also tell you that the person that created it is a guy named Michael Liebman. And when I used this chart for about a year, because it was in a presentation someone sent me from the Netherlands 8 years ago, and I was so impressed with it, I tracked him down. And we're good friends today, and he's working in genomics largely. But let me explain what this is about. The data curve that you see shooting up like a rocket is all the data in the world that we see coming in. Now, you probably know from your reading that the amount of data in the world doubles now every 18 months. Literally, all the information or data in the world is doubling every 18 months, and that is up or down, depending on how you look at it, from 24 months, and it was a 24-month cycle just a few years ago, and now it's estimated every 18 months. And if you doubt that in any way, shape, or form, think about your phone, think about the apps you're using, think about how much you touch it, think about what you do at work, the amount of social exhaust, the stuff coming off your phone is astounding, right? And it's kind of in the news, in case you're not keeping up a little with Facebook and such. But what happens is this reality. Data's useless. Data means nothing. It's a bunch of ones and zeros sitting inside a server. And until we take that data and bucket it into groups that we call information, it starts to take form. And it's less than everything. We don't ever grab everything that's sitting in our servers to move it into buckets to create information. And then finally, someone takes it and says, I want to study this information and that information. And we do research out of it, and we create knowledge. And we often call this knowledge management. And that is a whole subset of all that information coming from all of that data, right? And in the end, from that, we think about the knowledge, which can be outside or inside, which is why there's two pieces. And we create clinical utilities that then allow us to figure out how we're going to empower physicians or consumers through the right data and information combined to give us an outcome. Now, the reason I used to use this all the time is that I had to figure out how much of a data center or a cloud was going to cost. I had to figure out what the research budget was going to be in terms of information and research at Kaiser. I had to figure out how we're going to do the clinical decision support apps and the knowledge management that come from it. So we would actually build the whole thing off of it. And I put that there because when you think about the digital health strategy that you guys are creating in your own work, this gets into the whole consumer space, the physician space, and the full care continuum. And there's the underlying strategy. Now, here's what the consumer's doing. One, about 60% of them to 57%, 60% in prescription drugs alone are looking stuff up on the web before they come in to see you. 57% are looking at diagnosis. 45% are looking at treatment options. They have not yet come in. They're still just doing all this on a pre-basis, right? And here comes the interesting part of that 49%, they actually are walking into the physician not only with their own diagnosis, but they are coming in and 40% or 45% have their own treatment plan, right? 45% diagnosed, 36% treatment plan. They're walking in the door and they're telling the doctor, I have this, I think I need to be treated with that. Right? There's a cartoon, I was going to grab it this morning, I just didn't have enough time. There's a cartoon that someone sent me just the other day, and it's a patient in the waiting room, there's several of them, and there's a picture up on the wall, or a statement above the wall that says, if you're here as a second referral from Dr. Google, please refer to yahoo.com. And this is happening all over because people are grabbing hold of information wherever they can, and it's sort of a lack of access, and it's sort of a lack of knowledge about where to go to get the right information. So as we think about our digital health domains and our clinical decision support we're doing internally, we've got to think about the consumer hook into it. This cannot be another version of we have the information, let's not share it because they'll get mad at us about risk. We have to be able to look up and to be able to extend this knowledge management out to the consumer, or they're going to dive into this. And many of them said they're going to pay extra money for access to this. They want you to be the trusted advisor. This is super important to them. And the rules of digital health are no different than the rules of the internet, B2B, B2C, all of the different areas of marketing, social media. And yeah, we live in this really weird dichotomy. We were talking about this literally on Monday in the NHS and talking about the fact that it's the older group that's more concerned about the data, where the younger groups are just sharing it like crazy, right? And now the same person may come in and say, I want my data protected, and then run to Facebook and give a complete dissertation. But if any of you, by the way, have not seen on YouTube the millennial interview video, I strongly encourage you to look it up. It's hysterical. If you haven't seen it, you've seen a couple look it up, it's fantastic. It's an interview of a millennial, and the guy brings up and says, well, Facebook, she just starts laughing. Oh, that's what my parents use, right? So all of this is happening, and in your systems, this is not a CIO and IT only space. The digital health strategy and the ownership of it is changing our C-suite. It has gone from being a CIO-only domain, but now it sits in chief clinical officers, chief executives own the digital transformation. We even see this chief experience officer being a critical part of a conversation. So just to dramatize this a little, I want to walk you through the patient experience that we all have and ask you to put yourself into that space of this consumer that's used to having things go their way. And I'd like for each of you to think about your favorite restaurant. Where's the place you like to go with your family and friends? It can be for a special occasion, or it can just be for a really good time, right? Got it in your head? Now imagine, if you would, that restaurant was run the same way we run our healthcare systems. So you make a reservation. We call it an appointment. You go in, you sit, you wait. Your table may not be ready, so you'll go to the bar. You'll hang out a little bit while you're waiting to get in. You might order a drink versus read some magazines. And eventually you get to a table, and a person comes up and says, what are you here for? What's your issue today? What do you want? And they give you a menu to choose from, because there are certain services that are available and some are not. And you order a salad, you order a nice main course, it's got some chicken in it, and you want the souffle or a really nice pie for dessert. Okay. They leave, you're gone a while, maybe some bread, and then finally they come back, they serve the salad, and when they get through the salad, they look at you and say, thank you so much for being here for the salad today. For your chicken dish, I need you to go down the street to another location where they'll serve you the chicken if they have it, but they may not, and the menu may have changed by the time you get there, and your order may or may not have gotten there, so they may have to start over. But go ahead, and there should be a table waiting for you, and we'll give you this little tab to take with you. Here's a piece of paper. It's got some stuff on it. It'll be okay. But take it with you just in case, because we may not get the order there on our own. Okay? So you go down there, but before you go, you look up and you go, well, wait a minute. How come I can't get the chicken here? And they look up, they just laugh. Are you kidding? Do you actually think the people that do the chicken are going to work in the same place with the people that do the salad? That's crazy. We're not going to do that specialization like that. No, you got to go down the street. So you go, and eventually you get your chicken dish, right? And you made it. You made the few block walk. And you know it. It's time for dessert. Bad news. It is available. And there is transportation, but it's close enough. And if you use the walking app, you can actually burn off part of the calories before you get there. Would you ever go back? Because this is the consumer experience of what it feels like for so many people that are engaged in our systems. And so we have to operationalize some innovation to make this work. We have to do this transformation from this traditional environment into this integrated environment. And come on, we all know, it ain't a memo. Wouldn't it be great if we could just send out a memo? Tomorrow will be an integrated care model. Please make sure all warm handoffs work well. Thank you. Right? I mean, this takes a lot of muscle memory. This is really hard. And the team-based environment now includes these pesky patients who want to say in all of this. Because the reality is they're wearing 3 hats simultaneously. They're wearing the hat of the patient because they have something ailing them. They're wearing the hat of the citizen because they have expectations of what a system is accountable to them for. And they have the hat of the consumer. They wanted it yesterday. They don't understand why they're even there, right? And the doctors are going through the same change management than clinicians. This is really hard stuff, change management. You're in the middle of the biggest change management in the world. So how many of you have a trash can in your kitchen? Raise your hand. If you don't raise your hand, you don't have a trash can in your kitchen, I want to know what you're doing. How many of you who raised your hand have that trash can underneath your kitchen sink? Okay, fewer and fewer of us, but it used to be that's where a lot of people left it. And you'll find out globally it's about a third. Now, in my household, the trash can was on the left-hand door, okay? Seemed natural to me. I'd use my right hand to clean something, pull it open, throw the dish towel or whatever it was away, and cleaning products were on the left. Well, I went away on a trip. Something happened. There was a memo from upper management I missed. I don't know what it was. There was a consulting study that took place in the household. I don't know who did it. Might have been McKinsey. I'm not sure. But somehow a decision was made by in the wisdom of upper management, as I refer to it in my household, to switch the two sides. And the cleaning products went to the left. I still never got an explanation. And the basket went to the right. And I admit, I am not the brightest bulb in the circuit. It took weeks to stop instinctively opening up that left door to throw the wet paper towel into what were now the cleaning products, right? So imagine if you're that doctor or clinician, and moments before, for 20 some odd years, you're about to walk into the exam room, someone hands you a packet of paper that's got the information on it, you know just where to look. It might even have a note to say, don't forget to ask about Adam's soccer game. And then the snot-nosed IT guy comes in, takes away your paper, hands you a computer, does a few hours of training and says, it's all different now, good luck. And that's what it feels like. And so many of us are beginning to learn to use that data and the information, and it's bringing us forward. But it reminds us of this most important thing, and these are the couple finishes I want to leave you with. None of this works without people, process, and technology. It is that combination that makes any program work. It is never the technology alone. The rest of it will just chew it up otherwise. Because innovation, and I can go back, I saw someone taking a picture, but it is absolutely critical that the processes have to change to take advantage. Our people have to be trained in this change management. It has to come together, or we wind up failing. And the innovations that so many of us are working on are only going to succeed when these interests are fundamentally aligned. The cost and the risk has to be something as an organizations we're willing to take on. That incredible notion of failing fast. We have to do it. The clock is ticking. The economics are on top of us. Walk away, though, with this formula in your head. OO plus NT equals COO. Old organizations plus new technology equals costly old organizations. People, process, technology. We must have all three. And this is tough stuff. It's been written about a lot of years. Machiavelli wrote that nothing's more difficult than to introduce a new order because the innovator has for enemies those who have done well under the old conditions and lukewarm defenders for everyone who may do well under the new. It is classic change management. You put something new in, 25% are going to jump on it. They're going to love it. 25% are going to drop anchor and say, hell no, won't go. You cannot please everybody. Your job is to pull the 50% in the middle along with you. Help them, process, bring it together. So with that, I want to show you Bandit. My email is up here. I think we'll have time maybe for one question. I'm sorry I went so long. And I do want to remind you all of one thing, PCHA, Digital Health, in Boston, October 17th and 19th. Please take advantage of your membership. We'd love to have you come join us. It's about 3,000 people that'll be coming to the SeaWorld Trade Center. It's been growing every year, and we'd love to have you join us. And with that, I'll go back into the Sea Bandit. And thank you so much. Sure.
I think we have time for a couple of questions. We have a few mics around the room. Please raise your hand if you have a question for Hal. Oh.
Hal, can you tell us something more about the international work you're doing? How wide is it across the world now?
As an organization or just my mileage?
Not your travel miles.
No. We've been very fortunate to be very engaged. It's a little bit different formula international than in the United States. Where in the United States, so much of what we've done has been based on the growth within the IT sector alone. But the IT sector on the international front is not as robust. It's still important, but the budgets have been different. Where ONC gave us a lot of money to put our platforms in. So the relationship is also very different with the providers. The providers work as more of a trade union, if you would, and a very difficult one at that. So part of the trick has been helping in workforce development and bringing along the relationship with the provider communities, the hospitals. We just recently hired our Chief Clinical Officer, International, Dr. Charles Alessi. Charles used to be the president and CEO of the National Association of Primary Care in the UK. He worked globally. He is the past medical director of UK forces in Germany, and he's well-renowned internationally. Literally, he's Maltese, fascinatingly enough, and educated in England, and a good friend. I've known him for years. We're privileged to have him. So our goal right now internationally is get the provider community much more involved in workforce development. And workforce development, by the way, is an acceleration point here in the United States as well. We'll be announcing some relationships very shortly with some major medical institutions in the state of Massachusetts, as a matter of fact. So we're working on those, finalizing it right now, because the educational point of it's just critical. We're also doing the government relations piece, which is the key to the provider space. And we're also getting more and more involved in the pharma side, because clinical pharmacy and the use of genomics, which is sitting in that space, is going to have a profound impact on the clinical decision support that we are all getting tied into. And we'd rather be ahead of that curve than behind it. So we're doing this in a tasteful way, because our goal is not to have anyone walking around HIMSS Global Conference passing out pills, though some of you may like that. But it is, in fact, to recognize that we've got a joint relationship different with pharma coming up than we've had in the past. And as a very large example of the largest ecosystem in healthcare, we're tying them in. And they're already in the European market with us, and so we're bringing that over. Final thing about the international space where we're expanding, you will see a purposeful dedication that 20% of the educational sessions and our panels coming up at HIMSS 2019 and 2020, which will both be in Orlando, will have international panelists. So we can actually learn, and they can learn from us, but there's some really, really great things going on overseas, and we just haven't been as open to absorbing it and learning as we could, and we're taking advantage of it, because we got some really great membership and some great expertise to tie into.
I actually have one, Hal. We have our Innovators Spotlight. We have some startup organizations here. They're affiliated with Health 2.0. I was wondering if you could just take a minute to talk a little bit about the HIMSS connection with Health 2.0.
Sure, be honored. For those of you who haven't been to a Health 2.0 or not familiar with it as an organization, it's pretty neat. It really started out as Silicon Valley, and they created a place where healthcare startups come, display their wares. There's competitions that take place. They actually started with Datapalooza a little bit, and they expanded from there. And members of the investment community started coming to see what's the latest and greatest and what are those really cool applications they should be looking at to potentially invest in. And then the provider market started coming as well. And so it's really a chance, as you're doing here, to showcase startups and innovations that are going to have an impact on us. And look, as we expand our APIs and we open up that data and information capabilities, we're going to have three options in front of us to innovate inside our systems. One, you can build it yourself. And no matter how great we think we are, healthcare systems are not the best software engineering companies in the world. Some of us are very lucky to have a couple talented people, but to build what we really need at scale, that is tough stuff. Okay? We can do a little bit ourselves, but there's a lot going on out there. Two, the big box companies, and they're fantastic. They will do releases and new stuff comes along. But if you're at a faster pace or you have gaps and it's not on theirs, you're going to want to take an innovation company and be able to tap it in for a capability that you may not have today. And that we need to take advantage of the open APIs and the transformation of data, which is why we're working with the current administration on opening it up for the VA, opening it up for CMS, et cetera. And we fully support the direction they've been going in. We're working with them to get more detail, but the idea of more data transparency is fantastic. So hopefully everyone will take a chance and go back out of curiosity alone and see what some of the really cool startups are doing in conjunction with the outstanding organizations that are here and sponsoring and displaying as well. Because it'll be a mix over the years. And you'll take on more and more of these combinations as you move forward because that's where the market's going. So it's very exciting. All right. Well, with that, I'll stop burning your time and let you all get to break. That explains a lot. Okay.
Yes. Thank you, Hal. Thank you very, very much. We are going to move up, excuse me, we are going to move up the break. We're going to move a speaker, give the speaker a little time to get ready for the next session. So please grab some more coffee, some water, take a break, and we'll see you back in about 30 minutes. Up our next couple of presentations. We do have some more break time and some lunch time to continue the great conversations that you are likely having at this very moment. We appreciate you visiting our sponsors. Oh, thank you, Pat. Thank you very much. So I just want to call up Peter Regas from CyberMDX, who generously sponsored the breaks today, and then we'll go on to our speaker. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Hey, my name's Peter Regas. I'm with CyberMDX, right over there on my left. We're a company that focuses on, I'll take a minute to tell you a little bit about what we do. We focus on medical device visibility and security. So we're really one of the leaders in the space for both helping hospitals first find these medical devices on an automated basis. So what we do is we put an appliance in the data center. It will sit there and listen to the traffic, and will auto-identify and classify all of your connected medical devices and put them in groups by their function. So heart rate monitors, respirators, imaging machines, et cetera. And once it does that, And we'll do the second aspect of it, which it starts doing a risk assessment. So it will then map out how those devices communicate with other devices on the network. One of the big risks in security today is the ability to go laterally on a network, east-west, when something malicious gets in the network. So the last thing you want to do is have your medical devices compromised by that. So we map out the communications for east-west traffic for these devices on the network. Once we do that, we'll assign a risk factor to tell you and make recommendations to limit that attack surface. We'll also start looking at those devices and assess their vulnerability if they've got, and many of them do still have default passwords on them, old operating systems, et cetera. And so we do, to the maximum extent possible, make recommendations to limit the attack surface, reduce vulnerabilities, and secure these devices without having to touch any of these devices at all. And this is a fully automated system that will integrate with systems like Cisco ICE for network access control, for Splunk, for any kind of SIM and any other security alerting systems. We also integrate with firewalls for additional security applications. So we'd welcome a chance to tell you more about it if you guys want to come by the booth. But thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to sponsor the event. Thanks, guys. And thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, CyberMDX. So I'd like to bring up our first Innovator Spotlight presentation. This will be a 5-minute presentation with a few minutes for Q&A. I really encourage you to ask some questions for these organizations. So I'd like to bring up Simona Gilman from Metasafe. Simona?
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Great. Everybody's still wide awake? You have enough coffee? Great. So we're going to talk about a very expensive problem that's affecting all of us, whether or not we like to admit it. So this is how much money we are wasting in this pandemic that's currently happening. And every year, we're going to be wasting about $300 billion in the US healthcare system alone. And our pharmacies and our pharma companies are losing $187 billion. And we're losing a lot of lives because of this. So what is this issue? If we zoom down to the individual human level, right, we went global, now we're down on the street. 700,000 preventable emergency room visits every single year. Again, this is in the US alone. And a preventable death every 4 minutes. So what is this problem? Maybe you guessed from the opening slide. But medication mismanagement, non-adherence, primary, secondary, tertiary causes of non-adherence are landing all of us in the hospital, and we really don't want this. Okay, so how do we fix it? Well, enter Metasafe. We are a human-centric, personalized patient engagement platform, and we address all of the leading causes of non-adherence. We started in 2012 for a very personal reason. Our CEO, Omri Shore, his father, who's a diabetic, came to him and said, "Hey, did you see me take my insulin today?" And Omri said, "No." Omri meant, "No, I didn't see you take your insulin." His father took that to mean, "No, you didn't take it." Now, for those of you in the room who are physicians or have experience with diabetes, you know what happens when somebody double doses on insulin. So this was a very tragic situation. Thankfully, Omri's father is still alive and well and with us today. But it prompted Omri and his brother Rotem to get together and figure out, why is there nothing on the market that is easy enough for their father, who at the time was 67, to use? So they created Metasafe to address the multitude of issues that cause non-adherence. So therapy-related, the more complex the therapy, the harder it is to remain adherent. Condition-related, patient-related. It's very difficult if you don't understand your condition to stay adherent to your regimen. The healthcare system, Hal talked earlier about how it's fragmented and we wouldn't ask a patient to go, to a chicken diner to get their chicken. It's the same thing here. And socioeconomic, so cost is a major factor in the US, not so much elsewhere. So they created Metasafe, a platform to address all of these issues. Right now, since 2013, we have 4.3 million users. That's worldwide in over 20 different languages. And we're rated very high by all of our users. They routinely credit us with saving their lives because we make sure they don't miss their doses. 60 million app sessions a month, 1 billion doses managed, and 6 billion data points. So we are managing about 5 doses every second, okay? So we have a lot of information. We have a lot of this data. We've also gone ahead and worked with some of the leading CROs to validate our solution and have been routinely ranked #1, not only for the clinical validation, but also for the usability. Hal talked a lot about the aging population, and one of the common questions that comes up is, well, how are my parents going to use an app, right? How are they going to use a digital solution? Well, that's okay, because a couple of these completely independent folks went ahead and gave our app to a bunch of folks over the age of 60 and had us tested from a usability perspective and found that all is well, and it's still very easy to use. In fact, 1 in 3 patients who are using a medication management platform are using MediSafe. So what do we do with all of that information? So obviously we created the solution for the patient. We're gathering patient data. That's something that happens. Everything is HIPAA compliant, ISO secure, great. But also, we don't exist in a silo. Nobody really does. So we worked on creating interoperability solutions, working with Smart on Fire, Cerner, Epic, all of those good friends, to integrate with the systems you all might be using, and creating some insights, generating solutions to make population health actionable. So rather than just having a lot of data, what do you do with it? How do you hone in on different cohorts, understand these patient populations, and actually provide the solutions that they need at that right time and in the right environment? And then all of this is done in the goal of improving outcomes, so improving adherence to whatever the regimen might be. We are condition TA agnostic, so working across the board because the majority of our patients, well, they have a lot of comorbidities. So we'll talk briefly about these 3 pillars. So insights, understanding the patient. All of these patients are very different. They have very different motivations for what makes them non-adherent, different things that are impacting their daily lives. So we can zoom in and understand the individual. What days are they struggling with most? What meetings are getting in the way of their health and in the way of them taking their medications on time? But we can also look at the cohort. Sorry, there we go. We can also look at the cohort and see, okay, individuals with certain demographic parameters, this is what their adherence map looks like. And then all of our partners and ourselves, we can implement interventions at the right time that work for these cohorts. These are just some of the behavioral insights suite products that we have available and that we're working on. Engagement. So changing patient behavior, actually, at a recent conference, this question came up, and there's this idea that it's very hard to change patient behavior, and one of the speakers brought up, well, how could you say that? Because look at our phones. Everybody's glued to it. Look at Facebook. It fundamentally transformed the way we think about our behavior. So patients are people, and we can do the same thing here. So how do we do that? We identified these reasons for non-adherence, the ones that impact each individual person. We use all of the data that we've amassed to identify at what point do we need to supply what intervention. And the interventions are numerous and they're digital. So we can meet a patient at any point in their day, which is something that many providers and care coordinators and nurses can't do because that would be inefficient. Right time, right place. This is what the solution looks like. So very easy to use, really easy to understand. Functions like a timeline. It's a form factor most people are really familiar with, right? And then what are we putting in here? We're putting in multimedia education, drug-to-drug interactions. To date, we have alerted 30,000 people of severe interactions that could have landed them in the hospital, and that feature has only been live for about a year. Behavior-based reminders, so highlighting the points that they will struggle with, caregiver support, connecting them with their community, and so forth. And then adherence, the whole bread and butter of why we're here. So without MediSafe, you're kind of on a downward spiral. With MediSafe, here's what we're doing. Because we're identifying those points in your patient journey, we're also figuring out when exactly we can supply what intervention and pinpointing those points. So what does the value map look like? The patients can easily manage their meds, they can be more informed, connected with their caregivers, and live a healthier life. And we say healthcare because we work with providers, we work with payers, and we work with pharma, can benefit from all of that because they can understand how to better serve the entire patient population. So one last thing. I mentioned earlier some of the clinical validation, and this is a study we actually just released. We looked at a cohort of 4,000 hypertension patients, and we looked at what can we do in terms of improving their adherence, and we actually compared the self-reported to NPR to claims data, and this is what we found. There's a 21.8% relative increase in the proportion of patients who went from being below 80% adherent to above. And we also reached not only the patients who, may be predisposed to improve if they're just given a little nudge, but we also improved the adherence for those below 50%. Below 50% adherence to their hypertension medication, that is going to be very, very costly down the road. But we met those patients as well. So over the course of this conversation, we're zooming back out to global numbers. This is how much money we've been losing. This is this year. Over the course of the last hour or so, you've been here for a little bit longer, we're losing about 72 million. This is because patients are landing in the hospital, they're not as productive as they could be if they were adherent and living their healthiest lives. But it's okay, because we can fix this with all of you. I'll be right up there if you have any questions. Happy to share more of the studies with you as well. Thank you.
Hello, there we go. Thank you, Simona, for your presentation. We have time for one question. If anyone has a question they'd like to, it's bursting out of them they'd like to ask, please, right up front here. And then Simone will be happy to take any more of your questions up at the balcony after this. Hit the button.
I can also repeat the question. Yeah.
Thank you. So what's the business model?
Yeah.
So who actually is paying for this, and how does that actually work?
Yep. So question, what's the business model? Great question, makes a lot of sense because we're a startup, so we get asked that a lot. So a couple different solutions. Right now, we've just started commercializing the product over the course of the past 2 years or so. We started working mainly with pharma operating on a SaaS license. So pharma can work with us to better understand their patients and deliver different multimedia solutions to their patients through the app, so focusing on given therapeutic areas or different medications. We started working with payers. That's more of a value-based model. So what we're looking at there is you have your whole membership, and we want to help your membership improve their adherence. There again, focusing on different disease states, operating on that value-based model to improve the adherence. And then with providers, that's more of kind of an opportunity to make Metasafe part of the discharge process, so not so much a financial exchange, but more of a way to make sure that patients who are leaving the hospital are leaving with this additional tool so that they don't end up being readmitted. Make sense? Great. All right, find me right up there, purple coat.
All right, thank you again, Simona. Round of applause. Thank you very much for your presentation. Just wanted to also mention that all of these innovators are local, so we wanted to bring the local ideas and what they're doing out there today. So I'd like to call up John Pantano from Philips Healthcare to introduce our next speaker. John?
Good morning. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Craig Schneider, who is the Senior Health Researcher at Mathematica Policy Research. He has been a leader in promoting accountable care development and implementing payment reform strategies and engaging stakeholders across the healthcare system to improve consumer engagement, efficiency, and quality throughout his 25-year career. He is currently the project director of the Accountable Health Communities Project for the Center of Medicare and Medicaid Innovations, which connects beneficiaries with health-related social needs such as housing, nutrition, and transportation services. He's a former project director of the Learning Systems for Accountable Care Organizations project that develops and implements curriculum for Medicare ACO models. Previously, he was the director of health policy at the Massachusetts Health Data Consortium. Dr. Schneider worked at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services in Boston for 14 years in a number of positions encompassing provider reimbursement and quality improvement beneficiary services and outreach and healthcare reform. He currently serves as the Boston Director of New England HIMSS and is the National Association of Health Data Organization Program Chair. Please welcome Craig for our next moderator of this session.
Thanks very much. Of course, when you hear a bio like that, it just kind of means you're getting old, I think. Certainly my honor and pleasure to moderate this session and to introduce our panelists who are longtime acquaintances and colleagues. And I was reminded, and one of the things we'll be doing during this session is kind of taking a trip down memory lane. So something that Hal Wolf's presentation reminded me of, remember the picture of the dog? And that the dog had, better healthcare electronic technology than his son did. It reminded me of way back when we were working on the President Clinton health reform plan, which, if I recall correctly, did not get passed. But while we were working on it, I remember working with then First Lady Hillary Clinton on a major event in Boston where we brought together all the senators and congressmen from New England, and they each brought representative constituents. And there was a dairy farmer from Vermont who talked about all the shots and regulations and rules and all the requirements for her dairy farm. And sort of the punchline that we all remember from that day was she said, my cows get better health care than my kids do. And so I think it's setting the bar low. But let's determine that people can start getting better health care than our pets and our farm animals. So let's see what we can do about technology to improve that. So today's session, or this particular session, is exchanging data in Massachusetts. We're looking back and looking ahead. And does that work? Can we advance the next slide, please? Great. So I'd like to introduce our panelists. Ray Campbell is the Executive Director of the Massachusetts Center for Health Information Analysis. Ray is an attorney with multidisciplinary experience, working in senior positions with public sector and nonprofit organizations at the intersection of law, technology, public policy, and strategy. From 2005 to 2012, he was my boss as Executive Director and CEO of the Massachusetts Health Data Consortium. And he also served 7 years on the board of directors of the Massachusetts eHealth Collaborative and was its chairman of the board for 3 of those years. And he was also on the board of NEHIMSS and MASHARE, which we'll be hearing a bit about. If those acronyms don't mean anything to you, they'll be explained shortly. Our other panelist is Greg DeBoer, who is a principal with Exton Hall Advisory. Greg has over 25 years of experience in healthcare and information technology and has been at the forefront of many health reform developments, While he was in the healthcare group at CSC, he led the successful launch of the nation's first health insurance exchange, the Massachusetts Health Connector. So that's an HIX, not to be confused with an HIE. But before that, he launched and led the New England Healthcare Exchange Network, which is NEHIN, one of the earliest and longest running HIEs in the country. And he also served as a technical advisor to the U.S. Senate during the passage of the Affordable Care Act, and now he is leading the Exton Hall Advisory. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I tried it. Okay, I'll try it next time. Okay, so this session, it's going to be a discussion, conversational format, not a series of PowerPoint slides or presentations. And the other thing I wanted to explain is that we're going to be thinking about data exchange broadly. So it's not just HIE, Health Information Exchange, which is generally a clinician to a clinician exchange of data. We're going to be trying to think about how we generate data, make sure that it's clean and accurate, and then can be made available to multiple types of users. So yes, certainly providers, but also payers, employers, policymakers, researchers, and patients. So we'll start off our conversation with a bit of history so we can understand how we got where we are today, and then that foundation will help us imagine where we might be going in the near future. So let's see if it's working now. There we go. All right, so our first discussion question is to hear about each of our panelists' personal history with exchanging data in Massachusetts, and we'll start off with Greg.
Thanks, Greg. Happy to be here as the historian. I guess starting off, I'm a little bit afraid that I'm trying to explain phone booths to you. So it's going to be like trying to explain phone booths to your kids or collect calls or party lines. And if there's anybody out there who doesn't know what those things are, I'm happy to answer those questions after this, or just turn to somebody at your table whose hair's a little gray maybe, or it looks like they might know. So going back to those early days, I mean, I came up in IT at a time when it mattered what computer you worked on, you know, an IBM or an HP or a digital, and what you know, operating system it ran, and the PC and the Mac hadn't been invented when I started in IT. So we got to go way, way back. But and as Craig mentioned, I worked at CSC, Computer Sciences Corp., who didn't have a healthcare practice at the time, but I was involved in setting it up because it was such an important industry in this area. And the way that we broke in, the internet and the World Wide Web were just starting off in the mid-90s. You know, people were just starting to get interested in them as a business tool. And through Partners Healthcare, we landed a contract with a company called Healthscape, who eventually became Healthion, who eventually became WebMD. And they had a business model that changed every day. If you're interested, you can read the book, The New Thing by Michael Lewis. It explains those times. Very interesting times. But anyhow, through that whole relationship, we started to talk to a lot of people about collecting and exchanging health information and what we might want to do with it. And at the same time, we became, CSC, we decided to invest in the Mass Health Data Consortium, which Ray wasn't running at that time, but came in a little bit after that as one of the first IT partners. And that was a great venue, and it still exists today, and there are others locally that give people the opportunity to talk about what you might want to do with IT in the healthcare space. But out of that came, out of those two pieces, belonging to the MHDC and sort of the ashes of Healthion's foray into Massachusetts, we came up with the idea of using internet technologies to exchange data for purposes of meeting the administrative simplification requirements of HIPAA. And I'm sure you all think of HIPAA as a privacy thing. That's sort of how it developed, but when it was conceived, the notion was that it would take cost out of the system by enforcing certain standards, the ANSI X12 standards, for doing all the claims-related and billing-related processes. So with 5 initial partners in 1996, Partners, Harvard Pilgrim, Tufts Health Plan, Tufts Medical Center, who was part of Lifespan at that point, and BIDMC, we started to roll out NEHIN. And actually, you know, rather than this all be totally me spouting this to you or anything, we all love feedback. You know, Ray is just a lot like Kanye West, I know. So as I mention any of these things, I should have said this earlier, we're happy to hear a shout out. So how many people involved in NEHIN or know of NEHIN here? All right, great. So next time I want this to be like I mentioned Baltimore and you all go, yeah! Okay. So we did, we started with eligibility verification, referrals, claim status, and all those transactions in a federated network, building our own gateway for all of this because, you know, things didn't exist, tools didn't exist to do this back then. Out of that, we wound up leading the NEHIN architecture prototype, which was the beginning of ONC. Their first project was to prove that interoperability could work nationwide, and we did a project, and the NEHIN became, the NWIN became the Healthy Way, and became the eHealth Exchange. Nobody knows those terms? Come on, come on, come on. Oh, you can also boo and hiss them, too, if you want. Yeah, so, and at about the same time, the MHDC had started a project called Mass Share, which was to design to exchange clinical information the same way that NEHIN was doing these administrative transactions. And so we started with e-prescribing, if you can believe this, none of the EHRs, and there weren't really great tools for communicating a prescription to a pharmacy, to getting it through the PBM and all that. Everything was done with phone calls or written scripts that people carried along and to the pharmacy. And then Mass Share became, and then Mass Share moved into what we called the CDX, or Clinical Data Exchange, pushing data to other providers. We were involved with MAHEC, the Mass eHealth Collaborative, and their pilots around the state, a thing called the Eastern Mass Healthcare Initiative, EMHI. We wound up out of the group here that did all this HIE, not only the people at CSC, but people in all of these organizations that had gotten NEHIN off the ground. We wound up going around the country talking to other markets who were interested in this kind of thing, because now ONC was pushing this, and eventually it became a part of ARA, the stimulus, and that also helped roll out EHRs. We all, in fact, even traveled internationally to try to get this stuff off the ground. This is all just to sort of give you the perspective on the types of things we did, and Mass really was in the forefront in a lot of this. That led to then EOHHS joining in Massachusetts. We moved a lot of not only NEHIN into their infrastructure, but service-oriented architecture and an enterprise services bus that moved things between agencies in the state that hadn't been doing before, and as Craig mentioned, led to us being involved in getting the connector off the ground. Lately, all of this work, for me, has culminated in working on population health and care coordination, and ACO formation, which I think is sort of a natural outlet for all of this. But just in closing, going back to the beginning, what I want you to take away is real-time data exchange just wasn't happening back then. There was no interoperability when we started this. We had defined the standards for it. There were no tools. We had to write our own APIs and data mapping, and we had to convince organizations that there was a business model and ROI for all of this, which I'm sure all of you still deal with today, and we'll get into more of that as we go on, I'm sure.
Great, thanks. So Ray, you joined this story a little bit later, but certainly have been deeply involved for a long period of time. So what's your personal connection to data exchange?
Sure, well, thanks. Is this working? I guess I probably have to. Actually, maybe if I hold it. Yeah, that's probably a little better. All right, well, so thank you, Craig, for having me here, and Greg, thank you for those. It was interesting to hear those comments, because it was a little bit of a trip down memory lane because of the 7 years that I spent at the Mass Health Data Consortium. Really, there were just two areas that we focused on, which was EHR deployment and health information exchange. And actually that's not, there were other things going on as well, but those were really two major areas of focus, was on how to get provider organizations to adopt electronic health records, and then how to get them to share data once they had electronic data that they were dealing with rather than paper records. So the things that Greg were talking about were very interesting to me. The truth is my knowledge of that era is just a subset of Greg's, because Greg really was there at the very foundations of it. I was very fortunate to have a great seat for viewing it for 7 years. The Mass Health Data Consortium occupies a unique role, or at the time was occupying a unique role as a neutral convener of some of the key stakeholders to get together and talk about how they could collaborate around technology. So there were some very cool things, and certainly if folks want to ask questions or delve into that more, we can. But for me, you know, my experience with data exchange in Massachusetts is colored by the fact that I'm now a regulator, and we do lots and lots and lots of data exchange, but it's got a very different flavor than the data exchange that was happening when I was at the Mass Health Data Consortium. And you know, I should admit, notwithstanding the name Mass Health Data Consortium, at the time we were very focused on, as I just said, really the health IT and health information exchange spaces, and not the data layer as such. But I've been in technology for a lot of years. I guess we each have to, the obligatory, for over 25 years. I've been, but you know, my first computer was a DEC PDP-8 timeshare that they had in my junior high school. But my first, you know, PC was the first generation IBM PC. And all along the way, I've been an early adopter of different technologies, you know, using the internet when it was just Gopher space, you know, prior to the World Wide Web. But it was when I was at the Mass Health Data Consortium that I really realized that all these things I'd thought of as revolutions, the PC revolution, the internet revolution, the mobile revolution, they were really just tributaries of something more fundamental, which was the data revolution. That, you know, we had to, you know, as Greg said, in the old days, you actually were not just a general computer science person or an IT person, there was actually a platform that you were, and to some extent there's a little bit of that left today, but, you know, there had been such a focus on the IT layer. I think that, you know, it's only been more recently that we've really realized that it's the value of the data and the analytics. And, you know, we want the technology, it's absolutely critical, but it's to enable what we can do with that data. So that created a shift in my interest from kind of the health IT space more to the health data space, and that led me to CHIA. For those of you that aren't familiar with CHIA, we're a state authority, but we're independent. I'm appointed by the governor, the attorney general, and the state auditor. And we have pretty extensive regulatory authority to collect data about the healthcare system in Massachusetts. Massachusetts has done a lot with health reform and public policy, and they like to have a data-centric platform from which to do those things, but also really our history stems from back in the old days when the state was doing a lot of rate setting, and the state was collecting a lot of information from hospitals in order to set rates. So CHIA collects lots and lots of different type of data, individual data, aggregate data. The one space we're not in is, as Craig was saying in an earlier slide, clinician to clinician. And that is, I think, mostly what people tend to think about when they think of HIE, but I can tell you there's a whole lot of data out there and a whole lot of data moving around, and there's a lot of data that's needed, that people need to do their jobs better, make better decisions, and it's not always just patient-level clinician to clinician data. A lot of what we do at CHIA is aggregate data, and it's enormously valuable. A lot of what we do is population health types of analyses, and they're enormously valuable, and they sort of point to what you need to do next at the patient level. So anyway, my perspective on health data exchange is informed by kind of the Mass Health Data Consortium experience. Now it's more informed by my role as a regulator, but there's a lot of very cool stuff that has happened and is happening, and I think will continue to happen in this state around health data and health information exchange.
Great, thanks. So now, you know, that we've given an overview of the history and sort of how we got from, you know, the dark ages to where we are now, which is the less dark ages. So what were some of the greatest challenges that we faced in exchanging data? And I won't suggest we overcame them, but how did we at least address those challenges?
Okay. So as I mentioned, we had to invent a lot to get things off the ground. But in a lot of ways, that was sort of not the easy part. Finding it was the easy part. Convincing people that the standards that we were creating were worth adopting and would stick around was maybe a little bit more of the hard part. But a big challenge was convincing people of the business model, because trying to use IT to take cost out of the system or to do things more efficiently was really trying to prove a case not so much based on known costs and understood costs, but based on cost avoidance. So it wasn't like we were talking about we're going to reduce the number of billing clerks by X because people didn't believe they had that many billing clerks. I saw an interesting statistic a few weeks ago that between 1975 and 2010, that's a 35-year period, the physician supply in the U.S. increased by 150%, so a 50% increase. Over that same period, the number of health admin staff increased by 3,200%. So 32 times. But people didn't understand this because it was sprinkled all through the organization, and the centralized business office concept hadn't even been formed by most organizations at that point. So we were trying to prove to people that if you use this technology, you can avoid hiring hundreds of clerks, and that was sort of a hard sell to make. And then the other challenge at the time was that EHRs were not in place. Hospitals had EHRs. They were not largely open systems. They all had their own proprietary business and data models, just like the computer platforms did before that. And there was no funding program to put them in place when we first started. So where were you going to get this data from? It would mean, we talked about swivel chair interoperability. You might have some information over here, and then you had to swivel to another screen and enter it over here in order to use the network. Or we had to do, here's another one for the old timers, and other people won't know what it is. We had to do screen scraping in some cases, So the fact that EHRs just largely weren't in place and weren't standardized was another big challenge. Those three things: the business model, the lack of funding, and the lack of EHRs.
Yeah, I think that Greg has really nailed the central challenges historically, and I guess the one I would amplify first would be the business challenges, because I think that, and they fall into different, the HIE projects that I was familiar with fell into different categories, and frankly the ones that Greg worked on, because frankly Greg was working at a vendor and they had to be hired, and so that meant that there needed to be money, and so that tended to bring a level of focus and meant there was a level of reality when they were involved, and so things like NEHIMSS were in fact solving a business need. They addressed, and it wasn't as glamorous as information anywhere, anytime, the model of somebody lands in your ER and you can instantly provision the doctor with all of their medical records. It was much less glamorous than that, but it actually had a business case, and that's why NEHIMSS worked and why the stakeholders stuck with it and paid what it cost to build it and deployed it and have continued using it to this day. So some HIE projects really did have a business case, and they tended to happen, and they were difficult because getting the stakeholders to work together. These are competitors on many levels, but they saw opportunities or upside in collaboration, but that's a delicate balance. There was a whole bunch of technology to be developed or to be deployed in a new way for the first time, as Greg mentioned, but those were solvable. I think the real problem was there was this field of dreams concept for other types of health information exchange, that if you just built a platform, if you created a capability, or if you opened up some gateway, that suddenly everybody would be sharing information for the benefit of patients. And what we learned is that if there isn't an actual benefit at the organizational level for adopting the technology, deploying the technology, training people on it, all the things that go with using a tool, it just doesn't happen if it's just something that somebody thinks, wouldn't the world be a better place if everybody did it this way using this tool? So I think the biggest challenge was separating out those health information exchange things that were really supported by business drivers, business users, from, in those days you couldn't really tell. There were lots of great ideas, but it turns out nobody really actually wanted to step up and sort of with their workflows, their actual departments start doing business differently. So I think most of the central challenges really were around those kind of business issues more than anything else.
Yeah, and as you were talking, I thought of another thing. You talked about the money and the field of dreams concept. Another thing, and you've, I think, experienced this too, was inconsistent policy direction, right? Because we would run off and chase things that somebody said were a good idea. There was some funding available from a federal agency, different federal agency.
Getting
right?
whipsawed by grants, yes. Yep. And even state government at the time was a sort of an inconsistent partner. Sometimes they were in, then there were issues with them, coming up with the funding, and then they found the funding, and then there was questions around procurement, and so it was difficult to get sort of a steady, consistent leadership on some of these things, for sure.
Right, and I remember when I first got involved in this world around 2006, one just kind of assumes that the technology is the biggest barrier. Like, if we could just solve the technology, and as you just heard, the epiphany at the time was, oh, no, we can get the technology done. It's everything else that's the challenge. And we haven't even talked about kind of the security piece of this, too. I mean, there is that, the ownership, the proprietary, but there's also a very legitimate security concern about, well, what if I put my data into a repository, I lose control over it, but I still have liability. So that I would kind of add to the list of barriers, and certainly a list of things we haven't really solved either. But time has passed, and there are EHRs and smartphones and things like that now that didn't exist back in the early 2000s or that era. So are the challenges we face today the same as those in the past? And if not, what has changed?
Sure, I'll jump in. Well, so my challenges are totally different because I now have regulatory power. No, just kidding. But I will say the world looks utterly different. Like at the Mass Health Data Consortium, where we were, merely a convener, we were not a stakeholder per se, and everything was a matter of convincing people or trying to persuade people that there might be value in collaboration or what have you. Whereas now, like I said, CHIA collects lots of data, and we do it with regulatory authority. So every single hospital in the state submits data to us. Every single doctor's group in the state submits data to us. Every health plan in the state submits data to us. Every nursing home, every adult daycare center, every community health center, and so on. So in that sense, the world looks very different. But I also think that a lot of the challenges that, just thinking of state government data sharing, so shifting gears slightly, I've been talking more about sharing data with external entities. But inside of state government, there's a lot of focus going on now. The governor's been focusing on it and looking at how we can do a better job of just within a single enterprise sharing data. And she is actually playing a key role in that. And it turns out a lot of what it's about is linking as opposed to sharing per se. People often come to us and say, we need all of your data. And one example would be there was an agency, the Executive Office of Elder Affairs administers a bunch of federally subsidized housing programs. They wanted to understand whether the people they wanted to understand the medical situation of the people that are in these federally subsidized housing programs. So what they wanted, they said, was all of our data. It turns out that all we really need to do is get a roster of their members, and actually we can deal with hashed values. We don't even need to see it in clear text. Just take your members, hash it using a specified hashing algorithm that we require. We can bang it up against our all-payer claims database, and then you don't even want raw data back. What you want to know is what are the main diagnoses, what are the sort of primary cost differentiators between people that are in one type of housing versus another. We were able to report back to them really key information that they need for policy development and even for customer service purposes, but it didn't involve some pouring of all the data into some common data lake for them to wade around in. They don't have the expertise, frankly, to understand our claims data at that level. So it was a linking project, and it was also more of a rolling up, aggregating, and consulting to them about here's what we see among your members, their paths through the healthcare system. Those that are in one type of federally subsidized housing program came with lots of social supports, transportation, meals, and so on. The other one came with none. So we could tell them, like, here's how their paths through the healthcare system differ based on the level of social supports they're getting. So we're starting to get at the social determinants of health. Very cool stuff. But it was a linking project, and it's a kind of a one-time thing, or we could do it quarterly or monthly or what have you. But so I think that the way the world of data sharing has changed for me is that it's far more tailored. I don't have any concept that we're all going to pour everything into some single repository or that all the data is just going to flow kind of in real time, effortlessly, without boundaries. It's more targeted, tailored, and purpose-specific. And I think we'll eventually get to more of an information anywhere, anytime world. But at least in the world I live in now, everything seems to be, and it works, I'll tell you, much better with the privacy laws. When you're doing a data exchange that is very, very narrowly tailored for a specific purpose between two entities that have an existing, or are part of a public sector enterprise, certainly that makes it easier. But just targeted data sharing is a lot easier than the concept that you're just going to just share data overall. So anyway, kind of a rambling response, but yeah, data sharing certainly looks a lot different now, and having regulatory authority is the one part of it that's much better.
Well, I think the reason it looks different largely is that there's a whole higher level of awareness around it. You know, people understand what HIE and interoperability mean on some level, and how and have these targeted sort of minimally necessary data sets that they would like to have to do certain things, whereas back in the day it all sort of got glommed together, and you had discussions about whether you were trying to build a big database, a push versus pull model, centralized versus federated, all that kind of stuff. But some things are still the same, it seems to me. You know, while there are many more EHRs out there, so that the data is resident in a place at least, the vendors, the tools, all, to me, still seem focused on their own solutions. You know, to the great degree that there is data sharing today, it's moved more from data sharing to data access, at least from the patient perspective in a lot of ways, as people have rolled out things like Epic Care Everywhere, you know, as a way to get at data from other places, and patient portals have rolled out and become more prominent. But I think a couple of, so, you know, we still have that fragmented vendor situation without a clear business imperative for sharing the data across organizations. And that still challenges the business model. I think there's probably a little less, I'd be interested to hear your point on this, Ray, because of your changing role. There's maybe less faith in a regulatory role in this, or that there's going to be a top-down direction to it. And it's moving more into a consumer-directed marketplace for data exchange. You know, who's going to be the force that comes with sort of the disruptive model, the Uber for healthcare? We talked about that way back when, and it hasn't developed, but I can't see it being directed top down, so it almost seems like that's where it has to come from.
No, I absolutely agree. Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that back in the days of the stimulus bill and some of the earlier attempts at this, there was the thought that the government could really kind of force this to happen, or could really dramatically speed it. I think some good investments were made and a lot of good learning happened, but right, ultimately this is going to have to be grassroots for it to be effective. Yeah, I do think that you know, a lot of the challenges that have remained continue to be around kind of the business case and things like that, but they also seem to, they've lessened certainly compared to what they were in the old days.
So
I was
just going to ask, do you think the value-based care has changed the business model?
I'm sorry, actually that's what I thank you, Craig. I lost my train. That was what I had wanted to bring up when I interjected, was that is actually, at least from where I sit, and when we talk to providers and payers, their attitude really does seem to have changed pretty dramatically as a result of the accountable care model, which is something that has been, I mean, for more than 10 years, it's been, you know, been discussed, but and there've been early pilot models with, you know, Blue Cross's alternative quality contract and things like that, but the critical mass seemed to be lacking, and I'm not sure that we're exactly there yet, but it's far more on the mind of payers and providers. They're far more willing to invest in order to support accountable care types of activities. The fact that mass health is, and so the government can't dictate it top down, but they can certainly help influence the calculus of market participants, and mass health moving its entire book, or most of its book of business, into accountable care organization delivery methods and payment methods, that also gives organizations a strong incentive. So that's one case where the business model, you know, does finally support it in a way that the old fee-for-service days, you were really swimming against the current.
And the question there is, what does it support? You know, is it really real-time data exchange for care coordination, or is it that I can see the data that's been aggregated from many sources to support decision-making, clinical decisions, where to put resources, and things like how I'm doing in a value-based or accountable care contract? I see that piece right now. I guess I don't see the real-time, the driver for real-time exchange yet.
Exactly. I mean, that's where we're at. But it's partly the function of, you know, what we do for work. But all of the uses for our data and all the types of things that we're looking at get at kind of root causes and what are the drivers, and helping to understand, you know, like the opioid epidemic is an example. The state, data that the state has, you know, theoretically under one roof is in fact completely segregated and unable to talk to, you know, these data sets don't talk to one another. So you would, when I first started thinking about the opioid crisis when I joined CHIA, I thought, well, gee, our all-payer claims database must have a lot of interesting information in there that could shine a light on this. And yet, when I realized that we don't have any corrections information in our database, so wouldn't you think that understanding whether somebody had or had not been in prison would be vastly more predictive than anything that would be in their claims data? I mean, as powerful as claims data would be, you'd love to know some of these other social determinants. Well, all that data is in the state's custody, but it's in different agencies. The Department of Corrections knows who has and has not been in prison. The Bureau of Substance Abuse Services know who has and has not been receiving substance abuse services from licensed substance providers. The state lab is what determines whether somebody died of a legal or illegal substance. I mean, you know somebody overdosed, but was it heroin or was it OxyContin? It actually makes a difference. And so all that information is inside of the state, but it is not, and by law, you really don't want these agencies just wandering around in each other's data. And so this gets back to that linking issue that I was talking about, that, you know, we need to understand, but it's more at the population health level, what's driving this, where do we need to focus our interventions? It's not at the individual, not that there isn't work that needs to happen at the individual care coordination level, but there's huge value that can be done without getting down to the individual level or at the real-time level. I mean, looking at these things in a population health way, and once again, I don't know how that maps to what sort of private sector organizations do to serve the needs of clinicians, but at least a lot of our data exchange is more of that aggregated, non-real-time type.
Great. So our final question for discussion is thinking about the next few years. So we were looking back, now we're looking ahead. What will it take to make data exchange more effective, ubiquitous, and consumer friendly?
Well, it depends on what we mean by the next few years. You know, we've been talking about how the cost model and the labor model, as the keynote speaker explained, is unsustainable, but yet I feel like we're the frog who's been put into the cold pot of water and we're slowly boiling. I mean, it's gone up since I got involved in this in the mid-90s at the same rate, you know, varying from year to year, and we're not really seeing, we've seen some attempts at policy changes, and it's not changing much. And I think you still have these unnatural barriers to data exchange, natural or unnatural, depending on how you view them, and I don't see a strong public policy direction to this. So I hate to sound too much like a curmudgeon here, but it might take something really disruptive, and by that, you know, I mean really disruptive, a war, a really strong recession, or something like that. Or it could take something like somebody introducing a disrupting business model. You know, what if we had the ability to use data across healthcare as easily as we can use, just picking on a solution, Amazon? You know, that sort of fierce dedication to usability with all the right controls in place. If a solution like that comes along, great. And, you know, and speaking of Amazon and the JP Morgan, Berkshire Hathaway sort of effort that they have underway, or the things that Google and Apple are working on, or Facebook's talking about in healthcare, you know, if any of those came along as sort of a new way to deliver benefits to their employees or to the general population, maybe that would mean that a lot of this technology and the solutions we're talking about here for data exchange, data sharing, and data use would be more readily adopted. But I think it's going to take something really disruptive like that. I can't see us sort of voluntarily moving in that direction except for very slowly.
I'd second that. I think that I can only see two paths. One is that we just continue very slowly to incrementally get better at this as we have been, and that it's, you know, another 10 or 15 years before we're at anything like the level of health information exchange that we'd like to see, with information flowing between clinicians and with patients and so on. Or there will be some discontinuous event or innovation or business model or something that comes along that we're just not seeing. And I wouldn't rule that out. But, you know, healthcare is exceptionally complex. I mean, unlike a lot of other things that you can just simplify, I mean, there's really, you know, it's just a complicated, human-centric thing. And you can fiddle with payment models and stuff like that, but still at the end of the day, you know, it's about people getting care, not just about how it gets paid for. So it's not an easy one to disrupt, unlike some other industries, but I don't know. It seems like it's going to be a continued tough challenge for quite a few years to come.
As part of my career, you know, leading, based on the work we did here, which was really innovative and probably too far ahead of the rest of the market in the U.S., you know, I did a lot of traveling across the U.S. and even internationally. The places I've seen this move very quickly, and not easily, and maybe not even that quickly, but maybe in the course of 5 years as opposed to 10 or 15 or 20, are in places that had national health systems. And the other thing to think about in the U.S. and the thing to think about here is markets are different. You know, healthcare markets are very different. So even in Massachusetts, if Massachusetts took a leadership role in this, would it stick in Boston or would it stick all the way across the state? And that's just Massachusetts, you know, because what's in Massachusetts we learned through NEHIN. It spread into Rhode Island, but I wouldn't say it was as deeply adopted down there, and it never made inroads into Connecticut, New Hampshire, or any of the other New England states, even though we gave it a clever New England name. So state by state's going to be different. And when you get out, you know, to other parts of the country, boy, the markets are really different from here. And yet the vendors, most of them, are nationally focused. So if it's not going to work for them in all their markets, maybe they won't make the investment in it.
All right, we're a little short on time, but we have time for a couple of questions from the audience. And people are dashing around with the mics. Let's see who wins the race.
So if I just said 42 CFR Part 2, is that enough of a question? And really what I really want to get at, I know there are protections in place for exchanging sensitive data. Is it hurting on the population health level? I know it's hurting on the exchange, you know, provider to provider level. Any creative ideas or solutions?
Could people in the back hear that question? No, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, this relates to the impact of 42 CFR Part 2 on health or information exchange, and it's had a huge impact on us in terms of CHIA sits on or administers the state's all-payer claims database, so we essentially get a copy of every claim from every encounter that happens in the state, with some exceptions. And it was just a few years ago that some of the general counsels at some of the health plans said, wait a minute, doesn't this run afoul of 42 Part 2? And so we suddenly were confronted with losing a lot of the claims data that we've been collecting. And there's other types of claims data we lose, but we can sort of model what we're missing, whereas here it would just be dropping out very idiosyncratically. So it really threatened the viability of the all-payer claims database. What we've done is we've switched, but this is where if you're doing actual patient care, a clinician-to-clinician model, this doesn't work, but we like having data at the granular individual level, but we don't care who the person is. So we have our data submitters who have to submit to us by force of law. We force them to run software on their premises that takes all of the demographics, turns it into hashed values and strips it out. So we're dealing with hashed values. So we can do probabilistic matching on name and address and social security and all that, but it's on hashed values of those demographic fields. And so we don't actually we don't see the underlying data, or we don't see the underlying demographics. We can see people moving from provider to provider because the data hash is the same, because these people are running software that we specify. If somebody leaves Blue Cross and goes to Harvard Pilgrim, we see them moving across payers. So we get everything we need, but what we don't know is that it's an actual this person from this address, because we don't need to know that. So for our purposes, we've come up with clever workarounds, but it was a major issue, and this is what I just said is only the tip of the iceberg. We have many other strategies in play to try to get around it. It's been hugely disruptive to our data collection efforts.
So John Moore, who's in the audience, actually predicted at his executive breakfast that we'll be at 12 health systems nationally within 5 to 10 years. With that said, and that consolidation is required to achieve scale to address the silver tsunami that Hal had talked about earlier. With that said, does that render the public utility of HIE sort of, I don't want to say useless almost, because the incentive is there for the private entities, but not necessarily the public entities, so you let the registries take care of their end. Is there a real need for public HIE? And I know Chic would disagree with that, as they've pursued the patient-centered data home. But I'd like your opinion on that.
I guess I would question whether it's going to move that quickly to that number. The question was whether, if we have extreme consolidation of healthcare providers, I think, will we see a less of a need for a public utility approach? And yes, I agree. And I think the really innovative models today, the best models, are delivered by integrated delivery networks. But will those networks include payers along the line of a Kaiser Permanente model, or will the payers still be separate? And a lot of data resides there still on the members in a more maybe coherent fashion, at least on the demographics. You know, there are a lot of other players in the field still besides those integrated networks. I think it depends a little bit on what those integrated networks begin to look like. Right. Right. The follow-up is, you know, if they're pursuing self-insurance, does that change? Yes, it does. So the model has to change. Consolidation, along with model change, I think, makes this something that could be one of those that could be one of the disruptors. We've seen, say, University of Pittsburgh, UPMC, you know, has done well in the use of technology and exchange and population health by having done this kind of thing, but it's in, you know, one market. If it expands, can it become more powerful? Yes. Right.
It goes back to consent, right? Maine has been wildly successful because of their consent.
So the question is, how does the consent model in a state either support or not the sustainability of a network? And yes, I'm not as familiar with Maine. Could you tell me, is that an opt-in or opt-out state? Okay, yeah, and I think that's what we tried to do here in Massachusetts in getting Mass Share off the ground, was to make it an opt-out, and I think that's important. I was interested in the keynote speaker's remarks about the different attitudes between millennials and, you know, baby boomers maybe about the use of their data. So if you're comfortable with having that data exchanged because you think it'll be a good thing for you personally, then consent, privacy, security are less important to you than if not. And not only does the consent model come into play, but I think the number of people covered under government programs comes into play. Especially in Medicaid, you know, you're bringing up the level of understanding and awareness of these things to the beneficiaries. And when you explain it, they will generally opt in. It's much different with private employer-sponsored insurance.
That's a great point. Yeah, I think consent model is a very important thing, but also the market characteristics. I mean, Maine's done a great job, and they've got great people, Dev Culver and others, so Maine has been fabulous, but right, they're fortunate with the consent model they've got. They're also just their market characteristics. I think there's 4 systems that effectively dominate the inpatient service market in the state, so you really only needed to get 4 entities to agree to collaborate, and then you were at sort of with every state, if you've seen one, is unfortunately been the problem. Successes are hard to replicate because of unique market characteristics. Another possible breakthrough idea, I'm not sure if it's how much of a difference it would make, but at least it's possible it would, is we don't have patient identifiers in the state. A lot of the problems that I have to deal with is all this probabilistic matching we do to figure out if the person in this system is the same as the person in that system. If we actually had rock-solid identifiers where if you had the right to link, you could just link on a proven ID, boy, that would simplify things a lot. And I don't know if that's one of the barriers in the clinician-to-clinician space, but I know my world will get a lot simpler with unique identifiers for patients.
Great. Well, I'm sure we could continue this conversation for much longer, but I hope this walk down memory lane and, you know, the lessons of the past informing the challenges of today and tomorrow. So please join me in thanking our panelists for a great discussion. That was great.
All right. I would like to put this microphone down. There we go. All right, challenges, here we go. Introducing our next speaker is Peter Regas from CyberMDX. Just wanted to make a quick comment that our next presenter, there won't be any Q&A, but she will be around during lunch, so she'd love to talk to you at lunchtime. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. So Elizabeth Boudreau is an executive advisor at Amazon Web Services and has over a decade of healthcare IT experience. She works with customer service teams globally to understand their mission and business drivers in order to assist them in developing appropriate strategies for sustainable cloud adoption. Prior to AWS, Elizabeth was the Senior Director of IT and the Privacy and Security Officer at Claritas Genomics, where she led IT activities for informatics, bioinformatics, and laboratories. Elizabeth worked at Boston's Children's Hospital, where she coordinated the requirements and implementation of a clinical bioinformatics pipeline for the future of genetics research and clinical application. She directed a team at BCH responsible for the innovation, creation of internal custom clinical software and mobile solutions. Elizabeth brings a clinical mindset to the adoption of technology and when addressing healthcare challenges. In balance to a master's in health informatics from Northeastern University, Elizabeth has a Bachelor of Arts in Art History and Architectural Restoration from Boston University. Please join me in welcoming Elizabeth Boudreau. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Make sure I'm on. I always like to put my degrees on because it tells you I can help you build a medical record system or a Gothic cathedral. I'm really versed on both sides of the house. But contrary to the last conversation was where we've been, I want to talk about where we are now. We're using innovation. The future is happening now, and I want to give you some of the great stories that are happening out there because it's really an exciting time to be where we're at. We're in a market in New England that are doing amazing things, and people are looking to us. So I want to talk about what we're doing, kind of have story hour. My goal is that we're going to be a little interactive. So I'll be asking questions. I hope you'll engage with me as well. But what's going on? What's happening in the space? And hopefully this provides some inspiration to you to go back with, to think about, and start to think about what's next. So let's start with some basic things. Patient engagement. We've heard a little bit about that this morning, but we want to think more about how are we doing it, and are we doing it right? Okay, so maybe we put a portal in at our institution, but does your portal work with anybody else's? That gets into the HIE. And how do we start thinking about new and innovative ways? Our demographics are changing. We've talked about it, yes, we have the millennials, but the silver tsunami, if you look at who's creating startups, it's 50-plus aged people are building more startups than millennials are. So we need to engage everybody when we think about our patients. And also we want to think about this data. So we're getting data, we're receiving data, we're storing all this data, but what are we doing with it? How are we giving the data power? And so we want to think about analyzing this and supporting all the future things we want to do. If we start now, we're getting all that data to do something else. So I'm going to start talking about MedStar Health. This is an organization, 10 hospitals down in the Maryland, D.C. area, and they wanted to rebuild their patient engagement portal. They had 102 separate websites. Anybody in an org that has 1 million websites and you probably can't find the one you want when you need it? Anybody? Been there. The other thing is downtime, 2 hours of downtime a month. When we work in the clinical world, it's 365, 24/7, right? My patient doesn't only get sick at midnight on Saturday when I want to do my upgrade. That's probably when they're going to my website because they can't call the doctor. I need it to be up and running. I need them to find stuff. And then when they get there, I hope it loads, because if it doesn't, they're not coming back. How do we do this faster? So MedStar came to this, they really looked at how they were engaged, but they wanted this to be their foundation. They made this change. They started to think about, how do I make a change now that helps me in the future? And this was a redevelopment, a consolidation, and really looking at a platform for growth for them. And you can see that the vice president there said, we had the foundation for creating the mobile, the social, and the web services that are going to change the healthcare experience. Because that's what we're doing. We're changing the healthcare experience. So Philips Healthcare, this is a little bit older from 2016, but I love this graphic. It's the idea of healthy living, to providing to prevention, Diagnosis, treatment, and home care. It's this cycle. But where do we want to put the presence into this cycle? We talk a lot about fee-for-service. We come from that space, and we talk about how we're going to change it. But what I like to think about it is healthcare is sick care right now, right? That's how we think about things. So how do we change that to being true healthcare, preventive healthcare? Look at who is in your population. Look who's coming to you and needs your services, which there are many. And make sure that we're giving the right service to the right person at the right time. And the data we're getting is going to help us do this. We need to be data-driven in this space. We need to think about how we have this data, what are we doing with this data, and again, how do we get it back to our patients? So let's talk about some of the new innovative ways we're doing this. One of them is around chatbots. I've been lucky enough to be working with the American Heart Association, which is an amazing organization. If anybody hasn't been involved, please seek them out. They are wonderful. And one of the biggest studies that have ever been done on heart disease is local, the Framingham Heart Study, if anybody's heard of that. But they were starting to look at how do we start to engage multiple areas? And they came and said, chatbots. Okay, what can we do with chatbots? We did some basic work to start. We started with fundraising. They do a heart walk every year. How do you help drive people to come? You know, these are organizations that need to do fundraising. And a heart walk's a huge way for them to gain money to advance their science. They have amazing science, amazing people working for them. So they did a very simple chatbot that would help you register for your walk, help you fundraise for your walk, and then when you got to the walk, tell them you were there, streamlining the whole process. And it was incredibly successful last year. They did this out in DC. But then they start thinking a little bigger. How do we really get this in our mission? And My Research Legacy is a new platform they're launching. And we've talked a lot about opt-in, opt-out. So if we think about research, people are getting more engaged. We want to give data, we want to give that feedback so that research that is happening can help me. And My Research Legacy is a voice-enabled activity where I can report, I ate 1 cup of broccoli. I can do my diet, I can do my physical activity, I can link it up and provide samples into a biobank, and all that data can come together. And people are engaged in this way, because we think a lot about HIPAA and security, we think about losing it. But when you talk to families who have had illness, they're giving it away. Take my data, find a cure, solve this problem. That's what they want to do. It's a completely different paradigm that we think about a lot of the times of we must lock it down or else we're not compliant, we're not safe. I'm a HIPAA privacy and security officer by background. I've got a soapbox just as high talking about keeping things safe. But really we want to make sure it's safe and shared in the right way and used in the right way. And My Research Legacy is a new way to do that through voice. In comparison, kind of like the last panel, how many people have a phone that's not a smartphone in the room? It's okay to raise your hands. All right, I got 1. So we're talking about new and great things, chatbots, voice. So the NHS in the UK was looking at their chronic disease aging population. How can they help manage it? Not everybody's coming to clinic. Not everybody's showing up. So how do we check in? Well, old school voice and text messages really work because it doesn't require me to have internet, doesn't require me to have or know how to use, if I do have, a smartphone. So what did they build? In order to reach this audience, it's an automated chatbot, automated telephony, so that it will call, press 1 or say 1 to this question, press 2, say 2 for this option. But it's completely interactive to whatever they're saying, and it's completely customized to their care plan. So you have a population that can flip open their phone or answer their landline and make sure they're giving updates on their chronic condition that can go back into the system. So you're taking this older idea, but you're giving the people confidence in what they're doing because they feel, I can press 1, that yes, I'm me, and let me tell you what I've done today. That makes sense. But it's completely interacting to a human-sounding voice that's running automatic intelligence and creating a voice from text in their care plan. Completely different way to think about using old systems with the new. It's very exciting. This one's fun. Everybody likes to talk about the new Internet of Things. There's lots of it happening. We've got wearable monitors, wristbands. How many people have a Fitbit or something of that sort? How many people have continued to use it over 3 months? Okay, still pretty good set of hands. I will confess, 2 years ago, I won my Fitbit at this conference, made it about 1.5 years. But how do we keep people engaged in doing that? What other wearable devices are we making? You know, there's fabrics, there's all these other things, but they need to become part of the toolkit. We need to create data with these. We need to people get feedback, not only for themselves, because we know that the Fitbit population tends to be people who are already engaged in their health. This is a plus activity. But how do we get people engaged who aren't, that this is going to do something? Smart med devices are very exciting because we're creating new things and doing it new ways. Smart pills, robotic pills, other things that may be implanted for tracking, new ways to think about diabetes management, because we want to maintain, to me, you want to maintain your dignity when you're sick, because there's nothing worse than being sick and feeling put down. But how do we do this in a smart way going forward? And then mobile apps. We've got 1 million mobile apps. Anybody got more than 3 pages when you swipe through plus your folders? Everybody's got an app for that, right? So Ohio Health really went above and beyond with their app creation. What do people need when you look up a hospital? What information are you looking for? Where are you? Where are your doctors? If I'm looking it up for an emergency, how long am I going to wait to be seen? So Ohio Health built a chatbot into their mobile app that I could give my symptoms. My fever is this. I feel like this. I have pain here. And it's going to use a diagnostic algorithm and give you the level of care you should be receiving at that point. You're having a heart attack, call 911. Do you want me to do it for you? Say yes. Okay. Level 2, urgent care. You should see urgent care. Here's the top 3 closest to you and their current wait times. Or number 3, go to the emergency room. Urgent room. Or 4, you can wait to see your doctor. Let me look at their appointment book. Oh, I see something's available Tuesday at 10 a.m. It also looks like it works on your calendar. Would you like it to book it for you? How many people have still never booked a doctor's appointment online? Can you raise your hands? Really raise your hands. Now, of all the people with their hands raised, have you never done banking online? Usually it's about 7 years ago you did banking online, and maybe within the last year you've done your first doctor's appointment online. Tends to be the average. So the fact that this app can not only tell me what level of care I should be receiving, so we're putting people in the right level of care, not sending everybody to an emergency room, but it's also helping me pick my appointments that's going to fit into my life so that I can see my clinician. It's a great way to think about things. And if you are going to the emergency room, it's going to tell you how long the wait time currently is. So they're really trying to beef up their system. It's a place to go. I know if I've got a family member and I have to think about it, I want to know what I'm using my time wisely and that I'm doing the right level of care. So previous to joining Amazon, I was at Claritas Genomics, which was a pediatric diagnostics lab that came out of Boston Children's. And it was a really exciting place to be because when we spun out, we built everything like a startup. And like most startups, with not enough money to do everything you want to do, right? So we were completely in the cloud. So we did everything from the time the chemistry and the sequencer came off all the way up through clinical reporting in the cloud. And why was this important? One, it's cool. I got to say I could not hug my servers, and that was okay. But when you have a sick kid, you want an answer. The average time when we started the company around 2013 was 6 to 8 months to get a genomic result. Now, if you've got a sick kid, you don't know anything of what's wrong with this kid, and you can't pick the right treatment because you don't know what's wrong, who wants to wait 6 to 8 months? It's horrifying. So one of our initiatives was how fast can we speed this up? And using compute power and some algorithms, we got down to 6 to 8 weeks, which was a massive change in the scale of doing things. But that was 2013. Let's talk about what we're doing now. There's organizations out there literally setting Guinness World Records of what you can do in genomics. So the first is Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. They ran 1,000 pediatric genomes in 2 hours and 25 minutes. Okay, let's give a frame of reference. The fastest I had run it in my lab for a sample is 36 hours. 1,000 curated, ready for clinical translational use in 2 hours and 25 minutes. 60% of the population of that 1,000 was African American. It was one of the largest cohorts of African American pediatric samples ever assembled. And they were looking at everything from childhood diseases, asthma, allergies, they did some cancer screenings, and they also were looking at rare diseases because they had the capability to. This is changing science. This is changing the way we think about things. How fast can we do it, and how fast can we get an answer out? So not to be outdone, Rady Children's is starting to look at sequencing NICU patients. When you have a sick NICU patient, you want to have an interaction as fast as you can, because the minute you can save is going to change the course of this child's life. So they were able to take a NICU patient, and in 26 hours from blood draw to report and clinical intervention is the new world record. And they're trying to speed it up even faster. Their goal for clinical sample is 3-day max. So 8 months to 3 days. That's what we're doing. This is how we're changing science, and it's happening now. This isn't science fiction anymore. We're really doing this, and it's so exciting. Other things that we're doing around artificial intelligence and machine learning. So data analysis. We talked about gathering this data. We got to do something with it. So what are we doing with it? If we look in the medical space, some of our data is images. Scans, tissues, slides, all these types of different images. But how are we going to make that meaningful? We saw clinicians were running low. We need more clinicians. So how can we assist the clinicians we have to be more powerful and to be more efficient? And one of those is taking these scans, running them through machine learning to flag where they should be looking and why the machine learning says they should look there. So if we're talking about breast cancer scans, or if we're talking brain images, where is there something that may be abnormal? Why do we think it's abnormal? And are you going to go look at that and make a determination? So helping the clinician be much more efficient and in their decision. I'm not saying I'm taking away their decision ability. We're spending a lot of money and time training clinicians. I want them to use their brains, but I want them to use them efficiently. And I want to use the time efficiently to see all these patients that are coming. As we also think about this, there's other ways to think about machine learning and how we're dealing with patients. Not all of it's clinical. We're in the business of running businesses. So can I start thinking about, am I using my OR efficiently? How much time is being lost in my OR, which is a really expensive resource that I want to make sure I'm using to the best of the ability, and I'm getting patients through. Patient satisfaction, getting clinical cases up. So we can go back through OR schedules. Well, what were reasons that we weren't fulfilling our OR schedule? Anybody have to go through pre-consent for anything in an OR before? How much paperwork is there? Horrifying amount occasionally, depending on the procedure. So can we make sure that all that paperwork's done, it's all signed off on, a machine reading can look and make sure all the fields are correctly done, check it as ready, and then you're ready for the OR. You did not delay an OR schedule because of paperwork. Simple. Sounds so simple, but getting these systems in place. And then we talk about clinical decision support. So things about making decisions in terms of clinical diagnoses, but also what do we think about in terms of algorithms, getting the latest science available to the point of care clinician. You know, organizations like the American Heart Association put out the latest and greatest in science. But how do I make sure the cardiologist in the hospital has access to that? And when they're seeing that patient, they're making sure they're using that accordingly. So we can get the data from the science that we're doing in the hands of the clinician at the point of time for making the right decisions. But also we start thinking about additional voice things. What's sentiment? How do people feel about what's being said? Start recording things like that. And then how do we train and interact better because of it? And finally, we get into personalized medicine. Does anybody feel like they've had a personalized medicine experience yet in the clinical space? Is it vision still? Oh, I got a couple hands. That's exciting. That's 2 more than last time I gave this talk. But the idea is we have all this data. It's all about us. We're doing more genomics. We're doing scans. We're doing all these piece parts, but putting it all together and making meaning of it so that when I go in, the decision's being made for me, not an entity like me. You know, we're talking about all of these things where myself personally, please don't give me an antibiotic. If I show up with an antibiotic, you're going to kill me. So how do I make sure that no matter where I go as I travel around, somebody doesn't think a simple penicillin is a quick solution to what ails me when I'm in another location? Making sure that that data is available for everybody. And making sure we're tailoring our therapeutic approaches to everybody's characteristics. So I'm going to tell some stories. This is the fun part. So Veripad. Anybody remember the old litmus test you took in chemistry, maybe middle school or high school, that you're dipping your colors? Anybody have colorblind issues? I had a chemistry teacher who was colorblind trying to teach litmus tests. It was hysterical. So Veripad kind of falls under this idea. We have a chronic issue worldwide of counterfeit medications. How do you tell if the medication received at your space, no matter where you are in the world, and especially in less developed areas, is real? Because I don't want to be giving out counterfeit drugs if I'm trying to help somebody. So this organization came up with something called Veripad. It's a piece of paper with chemistry on top. It looks just like a litmus test. And you take the pill, and you crush it up, and you scrape it across all the lines, and then you soak it in water. And depending on the color schemes, it tells you, is this really the right drug that it says it's going to be? So humans started this process, they were using it, and the read accuracy was only about 80% that the humans read this right as if it was true or not. So the company put a mobile app together. The first app was only 80% effective. Well, nobody wants to use it. If it's just as effective as my naked eye, you've just added process, you've added activity. Why would I take this on? So they went back, and they started using machine learning. They took images of all the ones they had done, trained the system on what the answer was and what was abnormal to show the counterfeit status. So now I scrape my pill, I soak it, I take the picture. That picture is then analyzed, and now is 90% accurate because it's analyzing against a broader range, and now I've outpaced the human who can read this, and I'm doing it faster. So we're making sure that the drugs we are giving to people are the right drugs, are not mixed with something else, and are pure in order to solve a problem. The numbers for autism rising in the US tend to get staggering. And when we add in ADHD, those numbers are even higher. So when we start thinking about how are we treating, how can we help people and continue to have productive members of our society as we move forward, there's this great organization in Cambridge called Brain Power. And what they've started to do is use augmented reality through Google Glass with pediatric ADHD and autism patients and help them control their emotions, control their situations, and be more productive in the space. But they weren't sure how to track that what they were doing had any efficiency. There's no biomarker for this. There's no way to track. So what they started doing is using video streaming. They would record their sessions with the patient, both with and without the augmented reality, and see if there was differentiation. So they actually call this fidgetology, is their term of choice at the moment. And so they're using this to see how much is a patient moving their body throughout a conversation. So you can see there's a patient sitting in the chair. The mom is on the other side, so the camera's sitting over mom's head. And the child's talking about something they like. And they do this both with and without the Google Glass to see if there's differences. So is the introduction of the augmented reality with Google Glass making a difference? So with that, now they've taken these videos and they can start tracking the movement of the patient and created a biomarker so they can see if their interventions are actually effective. And they can track through. Extrapolating, they've actually written a paper that shows we're using it for autism, but how about for somebody watching TV? How many people watch TV and hold another screen in their hand at the same time? Phones, tablets, etc. So if I'm an advertiser, I want to know what screen you're looking at while I'm on screen. So instead of the old Nielsen ratings, how about if we had cameras that were tracking where my head and my eyes are during any of activity? It changes the way we think about marketing. I'm going to close a bit talking about the opioid epidemic. During the Obama administration, there was an initiative called the Data-Driven Justice Initiative. And why am I talking about the justice system in a healthcare talk? It was a data initiative. The idea being that nonviolent offenders tend to reoffend, but before they reoffend, they hit a social service. They might be substance abuse, it might be mental health, it might be an emergency room, but they're going to interact with some other department or entity probably before they reoffend. And what if we can interact in that person's life at that point and change the incarceration rates? Well, you need a lot of data to do that, and you need a lot of collaboration to do that. And so that's what the Data-Driven Justice Initiative was supposed to do. We had over 140 organizations around the country sign up and start doing this. And it's been amazing. So now, as we move into other ways to think about how do we use these data, how do we collaborate, there's a lot of looking at, can this initiative and this platform and this infrastructure that's already been designed help us in the opioid epidemic? And the Arnold Foundation has been helping fund this throughout. And we locally have two really great stories around this. One is in Portland, Maine. The Greater Portland Addiction Committee, who is looking at underserved populations, looking at their needs. What kind of things do people need to make a difference? They need housing, they need mental health, they need health care, they need substance treatment assistance. But how do I get my data? The DDJ already has the pieces in place. And just in the last couple of weeks, Middlesex County announced that they are also joining in. So now we're getting data from clinicians, we're getting it from HHS services, we're getting it from police departments. And this is really the first time we're looking at justice and health interacting on a platform to help betterment. And we really, I personally am very hopeful for seeing different change, seeing a change, thinking about people differently. This isn't an addict situation, this is a human situation. And how are we gonna treat these people like humans and get better and improve this? And I think data starts to be the answer. This is what one of the dashboards looks like. It is literally an up-to-the-minute data feed. This happens to be in Indiana, but you can see heat mapping, you can see changes over time, you can see types of drugs that are entering into the system. And there's different ways people are doing it. This is just one example that's happening under this platform. But this is immediate answers. This isn't, oh, a week, a month of data lag. This is minute-to-minute data streams of happening throughout clinical and justice initiatives. And this is what's gonna make a difference. This is what I truly believe is gonna see us help move the needle on this problem. So we need to start thinking big. Cool stuff's out there. People are doing amazing stuff. I work with brilliant people. It's actually one of the best parts of my job, is I get to work with brilliant people who have amazing ideas and make them happen. And I get to come in and just help them along the way. So how do we think big about problems? How do we think about what's next? How do we take all these tools that are out there and change the world? So at Amazon, we have a science fair internally. Anybody have to do a science fair project or build your child's science fair project and pretend it was theirs? Anybody? So our developers and tech teams, and it's open to anybody internally, we hold the science fair. And Troy, who's in the picture, did this 2 years ago internally. And Troy's a friend of mine. His son, Calvin, is a nonverbal autism patient. But he wants to keep him at home. He wants him to be productive. And he doesn't want to feel like I'm nagging. Calvin, did you do this? Calvin, did you do that? Calvin should be independent. He's been looking at how can he use technology to help make his son more independent in his own way. So he created the Polexi Project. We have two services called Poly and Lex, which is where Polexi comes from. But it's this idea of, can we automate activity for interaction? So he built a chatbot. And it will say things like, Calvin, it's time to brush your teeth. Calvin walks up, pushes the button that he understood and heard the message, and then will turn and go brush his teeth. We have found that he likes the British voice over the women's voice, because you can't pick your voice. But it's been trial and error. But it's allowed him to have his own time, to be able to fulfill his own personal needs without a human constantly saying, did you do this? Da, 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 da. That agnostic voice is making a huge difference. So I talked to Troy this year when Science Fair came up year number 2. Troy, what are you doing? Because I know you're doing something. He's like, yeah, I got a new home automation system. Okay, what do you mean? So there's really only 3 walkways in my house, so I put cameras up, and Calvin likes the sound of water. So he likes to flush toilets. He likes to turn on the sink. He loves the sound of water. But Calvin's almost 18 now, and there's some safety issues around that in the house. And as you can see, he has a lovely sister and a very cute dog. I guess everybody needs a cute dog in their talk. So well, what are you doing about it? Well, I have this whole algorithm set up, so it knows what hours Calvin's supposed to be in his room in bed, and what hours my wife and I stay awake. And if Calvin leaves his room and sets off a motion detector via the cameras, in those hours, I turn off the water in my house so he doesn't flood my house while I'm asleep. It's happening now. This is what he's doing in his off time. I can't imagine, like, his work life's amazing because this is what he does for fun. But starting to think about, we're not locking the door. We're not telling Calvin he can't go anywhere. We're saying, okay, you're independent, but I'm going to make sure you're safe in that manner. And we're going to make sure the rest of our family's safe in that same way. So I wanted to say, we talk about the art of the possible, but it's the art of the now. It's happening. It's out there. Learn about it. Find out how we can get it in your space. How do we make your work, your personal, your patients' lives better? Because we can. And my challenge really is for you to determine what's next. You all have the capability. You all have something in there. You have a passion about something. You have a concern about something. You have a family member yourself who has had an issue in some way or another, and it's within you to help solve that in this community. Am I good? So with that, I want to thank you. I am around for lunch for chit-chat, but thank you for being an engaged audience and talking with me today.
All right. We have our second Innovator Spotlight presentation, so we'll quickly transition into that. I'd like to invite Dr. Art Combs to the stage, and he'll, from MC10, he'll give you a presentation on their products.
Okay. My mic on? Hello, everyone. I have the dubious distinction of standing between you and lunch. So I'll be quick and painless. What I'm holding in my hand is called the BioStamp. It weighs 8 grams. Inside it is an accelerometer, a gyroscope, an analog front end for ECG, EMG, flash memory, a microprocessor, a Bluetooth low energy radio, a lithium polymer battery, and you can wear it anywhere on your body. The company's intellectual property estate surrounds the fact that not only can you do that, but it twists, it bends, it conforms to any part of the body. We have over 400 patents surrounding flexible electronics, and the materials that encapsulate them. But as a good entrepreneur, I know I have to answer a different question for you, which is, so what? Okay, so you got this cool sensor. What can you do? Well, it turns out that now we're seeing, particularly in clinical trials, a trend for being interested in data that come from people when they're, as they say, in the wild, in their own habitat, in their homes, where healthcare needs to happen and where the patient's condition really unfolds. There's a role for medical grade wearables. I am not here, with all due respect, to trash Fitbit or the Apple Watch or the whatever. On the other hand, this is a Class 2 FDA 510K cleared medical device. This produces clinical quality medical grade data. This is not a toy, it's not a leisure product, it's not a wellness product, it's not a fitness product, it's a medical device. And lastly, we've noticed that particularly in clinical trials, people are more and more interested in quality of life. What does that mean? I don't really know. On the other hand, I do know that the way they measure quality of life is with surveys and questionnaires. I've been a clinician way too long to believe that those data are 100% accurate. This gathers real, objective, physiological data passively, dispassionately, and tells you really how your patient's doing. This is part of a system. It's an end-to-end system designed initially for use in clinical trials, where the structure is that patients come in to be seen in clinic at intervals and oftentimes have intensive testing and whatever to see what's going on with the drug trial or the therapeutic effect or what have you. And in between, they know nothing about what's going on. I mean, if the patient was to develop a treatment failure, a treatment success, or a side effect, it would be happening in their home. So we've created an end-to-end system that helps you design a clinical trial, provision and deploy these sensors, gather data from the patient, even in their own home, and have these data uploaded directly to the cloud and processed through our algorithms. As I said, the device is a Class 2 medical device cleared through the FDA, and the algorithm outputs include vital signs, actigraphy, posture classification, sleep metrics, and I would submit to you that if you knew all of those things at once, this might be a reasonable picture of what quality of life for that patient is. The data are available either in processed form through the investigator portal as dashboards. I'm going to show you some examples, or through an API where you can download the data in both processed and raw form. So you have the opportunity to do your own research, look for your own algorithms, and invent, if you will, your own digital biomarkers. This is what the system consists of. There's sensors. There's a dock that recharges these sensors and also uploads data to the cloud. There's a mobile client. You can use it to gather surveys and EPRO. You can use it to coach your patient. You can use it to remind them of prescribed activities. You can even have them take a picture of their surgical wound and send it to you so you know how it's doing. All kinds of possibilities. It's an end-to-end system. Design a trial, run a trial, analyze the data. You can wear this sensor anywhere you want. You can wear it on extremities, you can wear it on the chest, you can wear it anywhere you want, and you can configure not only where they're worn, but what data they are gathering from those sites. So for example, our technology was used in a trial to mimic the UPDRS, Universal Parkinson's Disease Rating System, passively and objectively. We found that we could do the motor assessment most of the time with good accelerometers, but we found that for things like this, it didn't work. But when we put the patch on the extensor digitorum and looked at the EMG, we were able to see it very, very clearly. So the opportunity for you to just to not just deploy these where you're interested, but to tailor the multimodal capability for a particular endpoint is essentially infinitely flexible. You see here depicted some of the possible and tested body locations. This is a summary of the algorithmic output. These are the process data that you get. Activity, state, and classification. And if, for example, you're classified as walking, it will also count your steps, and it will also tell you what your gait cadence is, that is in steps per minute. It will tell you how much time you spent sleeping, how much time you spent resting, how much time you spent actively. It will give you your vital signs during those things, so not just heart rate, but heart rate while sleeping, heart rate while resting, heart rate while active, etc. In fact, in all, 44 processed algorithmic outputs coming off this sensor. And I would submit again that if you knit these together, what did you do? How were your vitals? How did you sleep? How about your activities of daily living? This is a picture, an objective physiological picture of quality of life. So now the real answer to the so what question. I'm a clinician. I've been reading the New England Journal of Medicine since it was written with a pen. This is a typical New England Journal article, with all due respect. It's an unpronounceable pharmaceutical being used in an arcane condition that most lay people have never heard of. Isosorbide mononitrate in patients with congestive heart failure and preserved left ventricular function. What's new about this is that the endpoint was not ejection fraction, stroke volume, cardiac output, you name it. The endpoint was actigraphy units. It wasn't just a question of, does this medicine help your heart? It was, does this medicine help you? Since you've been taking this medicine, are you more or less active? Do you take many or fewer steps? Do you sleep better or worse? This is really, really new. In fact, if you look at clinicaltrials.gov, which these two screenshots are taken from, you will find that there are more than 100 trials right now with actigraphy as an endpoint. These are pharmaceutical trials, over 100 of them, and there are over 8,000 of them, believe it or not, that's the number, over 8,000 using quality of life as a clinical trial endpoint. Now, here's just a little teeny little piece of one dashboard from our product, and what you see is longitudinal data. Not how are you doing today, but how are you doing? In this particular case, it's like how many hours are you sleeping, what was your average heart rate while you were asleep, etc. These kinds of things. Showing you a more interesting example, across the top is kind of a color bar. Blue, the patient is fast asleep. But notice where the red number 1 is, there was a line in the middle of the sleep. Patient woke up suddenly, and you see the spike in their heart rate. In the morning when the patient got up and began to become active, yellow toward green toward orange, you see the heart rate climbing. Later in the day, you see the patient actively exercising, the thick orange bar. And again, the heart rate responds. And later, the patient sits for a protracted period of time, you see the heart rate drift down. Now, this is the who's buried in Grant's tomb slide, okay? We all know that this is true. But this is the first time we've actually asked the question, how do you contextualize these data? We've had Holter monitors for 30 years, but we have no idea what you were doing when your heart rate was X. And we've got Fitbits and this and that's that tell you, yeah, okay, you're taking this number of steps, but do you have medical grade vital signs while you're exercising? This is an opportunity to contextualize one with the other. Did I detect an arrhythmia? Cool. What were you doing when it happened? Or, I detected an arrhythmia. What happened to you as a result? You can't just pick these onesie-twosie things out. This is an opportunity to look more globally. So we've designed a product. It's based on the science and engineering in this sensor. But this is a medical grade clinical quality sensor to gather real objective physiological data, to feed a system that processes those data, presents them in a useful way, and gives you the opportunity to take them back out either in processed algorithmic format or in raw data format. Raw data format, you may be a researcher. You may be an academic institution. You may be, as we just heard, in the world of ADHD or behavior disturbances where you're really looking for a biomarker. But in the meantime, this is a chance to know how your patient's doing and what their quality of life is in their own home. Not in the clinic in front of you, not telling you what they think you want to hear, but actually what real life looks like for these people in between clinic visits. And with that, I thank you, and I'm happy to take a question. No questions? You must be hungry. Thank you. My pleasure. Yep.
Okay, well, great, thank you. Dr. Combs will be up at the balcony area with the other innovator spotlights. They'd be happy to talk to you after this during lunch and during the second break later in the afternoon. At this point, I would like to invite Tim O'Malley from iOvations to join us, and Checkpoint, iOvations Checkpoint, and thank them for sponsoring lunch, and which we will be right into. And I just want to mention one more thing. We're also going to have the access to the deck here as well. So for lunch, if you'd like to go out there and enjoy the weather, hopefully it's nice, you may be able to do that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, everybody. Checkpoint, we're a cybersecurity company. Michael and I were just chatting recently and a couple of minutes ago. Haven't heard a lot of talk about security here, so hopefully this hits home with some of you in the audience. So generally speaking, where we help our customers is around the concepts of mobile, cloud, and threat prevention, regardless of where it's being deployed in your business. We typically start the conversation talking about the data center because everybody has one. It might be a file server in a closet, or it might be a big corporation with a lot of data centers. That's typically where we start the conversation. And the most important thing about the data center is that if you can prevent something malicious from getting in the first place, then you don't have to respond to it. Now, we know in today's day and age with the increasing volume and sophistication of attacks, what you want to be able to do, it's critical to be able to prevent the attack from getting in the first place. Not just detection, but actually being able to prevent it. And that's really one of our key messages to the marketplace is Checkpoint believes we can help you prevent the next attack from getting in. And as you're talking about prevention, one of the things you want to think about is consolidation. And you can consolidate many technologies onto a single platform. So for example, you can take your next generation firewall, your sandboxing technology, maybe your content filtering, put that all on a single platform. The reason you want to do that is now you have shared intelligence. And what we can do at Checkpoint, we have a platform, it's called Infinity, and Infinity allows you to connect everything in the data center to a single platform for shared intelligence. The next thing that we typically engage our customers with is talking about the end users, because the end users are accessing the data, and that's what the bad guys are looking for. So what complicates this is that our end users they're moving around outside the confines of the corporate network in the data center, and they're moving around in the public space, connecting to public Wi-Fi, et cetera, right? And they're also accessing accessing the data from multiple devices, right? Typically 3, typical kit of an employee. They've got a laptop, they've got a smartphone, and they've got a tablet. So basically at this point, it could be, you could look at that as a problem. You can also look at it as an opportunity. And the opportunity is that if you begin to look at these protecting the devices from a preventive perspective, you can actually start to gather a lot more information about what's going on in your environment, as well as protect damage to the device itself. So for example, if we look at ransomware, where we have a high level of confidence as to the malware that's coming into that device, then we can provide full remediation from start to finish and restore that device to a pre-infection state. It's all done through automation, didn't require any interaction from your team, and we can prevent both known and unknown zero-day attacks from getting in. And then the last thing I just want to touch on is virtualization or cloud technologies. Could be typically customers have a combination of private cloud, public cloud like AWS or Azure, and you're trying to figure out how to get some more life out of the legacy hardware maybe that you have in the environment. But it gets complicated, right? Because you're moving your applications and workloads from your data center up to a public cloud, or you're virtualizing it in some fashion. And particularly in the public cloud, really the challenge is, how do I secure it if I don't control the underlying platform? So what Checkpoint is saying, that really the statement that we're making is, you can apply the same security controls to anything that you're deploying in the cloud, either public or private, in the exact same fashion that that you're doing that with in your data center or your virtual clouds, right? So the benefit is that you get to pull all this together into a single unified console. The policy of your organization is being presented in a very clean fashion to your security team. So thanks very much for your time, and hope you get to stop by the table. Bye now.
All right, one last thing before I let you go. Just as a reminder, we have our little raffle bingo. We have 2 things. The chapter is giving away to 2 people the most visits to the tables. And the second is our sponsors themselves. Some of them are giving away raffles. So please visit them, drop a business card. We'll raffle everything off at the end of the day. So we hope you'll visit them and visit our innovator spotlights up at the balcony. Enjoy lunch. 1:30 we'll be starting back up again. So thank you.